Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. The sensors weren't supposed to go off in that section. Not at 2 a.m., not in that weather. I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. I know every trail, every sensor placement, every normal wildlife pattern. This was different. I was in the station when the alert came through. Screen showed movement in Zone 7, near the old growth section. Temperature was dropping, hovering around 38 degrees. Light rain, bad visibility. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, radio, tranq gun, first aid kit. Standard procedure. Checked my phone. No signal. Also standard for that area. The drive to Zone 7 took 20 minutes. Dirt road was slick from the rain. My truck's headlights caught nothing but trees and mist. I kept the heat on high. The radio crackled with static every few minutes. No other rangers were on duty in this sector. Budget cuts meant solo night shifts were common now. I parked at the service trail entrance. The rain had gotten heavier. Water dripped from the trees. I put on my rain gear and checked my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but didn't reach far in the mist. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No owls. No small animals. Nothing. The sensor was 400 yards in. I followed the trail, scanning with my light. The mud was soft from the rain. That's when I saw the first track. I've seen every kind of print in these woods. Bear, cougar, elk, human. This was different. It was huge. Deep. The mud had settled clean around the edges. Fresh. I measured it with my hand. The print was twice the length of my palm. The depth suggested something heavy. Very heavy. The stride length between prints was impossible for a human. 7 feet at least. They headed east, off the trail. I radioed base. Static. Tried again. Nothing but white noise. I took photos of the prints with my digital camera. Placed a marker. Standard procedure says to document and wait for backup. I know this. I've trained others on this. But the tracks were fresh. Maybe 30 minutes old. My light caught more prints ahead. They formed a clear path through the underbrush. No broken branches, though. Whatever made them moved carefully. Deliberately. I followed. The rain muffled my footsteps on the wet ground. The prints led to a clearing. I stopped at the edge, swept my light around. The trees here were old. Huge trunks disappeared into the darkness above. The ground was covered in ferns and moss. More prints crossed the clearing. Then I heard it. A crack, like a thick branch breaking. But it came from high up. 20 feet at least. My light caught movement in the canopy. Something dark shifted between the branches. Too big for a bear. Way too high. The smell hit me next. Sharp, musky, like wet fur and something else. Something wild. Not decay exactly. More organic. Primal. It filled the clearing, made my eyes water. I've smelled bears, cougars, every animal in these woods. This was new. Another crack. Closer this time. My light caught another flash of movement. Lower now. I heard breathing. Deep, heavy breaths. Not animal pants or growls. These were measured, controlled, almost human but bigger, fuller. I reached for my radio again. Pure static. The breathing got closer, coming from my right now. I turned slowly. My light beam hit a tree trunk, followed it up, stopped. A hand. That's what registered first. A massive hand gripping the trunk. Long fingers, dark fur, muscles visible under thick hair. The fingers tensed, bark cracked under them. I raised the beam higher, arm, shoulder. The beam caught an eye. Just for a second. Dark, intelligent, very intelligent. Then it was gone. Fast, too fast for something that size. The tree shook. Others followed in sequence, moving away, breaking branches, heavy impacts, but controlled, deliberate, like it was trying to be quiet despite its size. The sounds faded east, toward the deeper forest. I stood there, 5 minutes, 10, no more sounds. The smell lingered. I took more photos. Close-ups of the handprint on the tree, bark samples where it had gripped, measurements, hair samples from where it had brushed past branches. All went into evidence bags. The rain was falling harder now. Soon it would wash away the tracks. I marked the trail with surveyor tape, documented GPS coordinates, standard procedure finally kicking in through the adrenaline. It took an hour to collect everything. My hands shook the whole time, not from cold. The silence in the forest remained absolute, like every animal was hiding, waiting. I headed back to my truck, didn't turn my back on the clearing, walked backwards part of the way. Training kicks in sometimes, kept my light moving. Nothing followed, nothing moved. The drive back was a blur. I radioed ahead, finally got through, filed the initial report, set the evidence for processing, filled out the forms, standard procedure. They found more prints the next day, more hair samples. The lab results were inconclusive. Hair didn't match known species. Prints showed dermal ridges, like human fingerprints, but not human pattern. The bark samples showed impact strength far beyond any known primate. I've been back to that clearing many times since then. Day shifts, night shifts, never saw it again. But sometimes on quiet nights, I catch that smell, just traces, and the forest goes silent. The animals know, they always know. I've been a ranger for 12 years. I know these woods, know what lives here, what should live here. That night I saw something else, something that shouldn't exist but does. My report sits in a file now, one of many. Evidence bags in storage, photos filed away. The official report says, unknown species encounter, standard procedure. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled. It's out there, moving through my woods, watching, thinking, hiding, but existing. That night changed how I see these woods, changed how I work. I still do my job, still follow procedure, but I watch the canopy now, check the high branches, listen for that specific kind of silence, and when I catch that smell, that distinctive primal scent, I walk away. Some things in these woods deserve their privacy. The sensors still go off sometimes in Zone 7, usually at night, usually when it's raining. I still respond, still follow procedure. But now I understand. These woods don't belong to us. We're just visitors here. There are older things in the forest, smarter things. They watch us from the trees, from the shadows. I file my reports, collect samples, follow procedure. But I don't chase shadows anymore, don't follow tracks into the dark. Some mysteries should stay mysteries. Some creatures deserve their secrets. Let others try to prove what's out there. I know what I saw. That's enough for me. The new rangers ask me sometimes about that night, about what I saw. I show them the file, the photos, the lab reports. Let them draw their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing. When the forest goes quiet, when they catch that smell, when the shadows move too deliberately in the canopy, respect it, document it, but don't chase it. Some things in these woods have earned their peace. I still work the night shift, still patrol Zone 7. The sensors still go off. The forest still goes quiet sometimes. And on rare nights, when the rain is falling and the mist rolls in, I catch movements in the trees, high up, deliberate, intelligent. I file my reports, follow procedure, but I don't shine my light up anymore, don't try to catch another glimpse. Some secrets belong to the forest. Some mysteries should stay unsolved. I do my job, protect my woods, and let the shadows keep their privacy. That's my procedure now. That's enough. The events I'm about to describe happened during my regular night patrol at Olympic National Park on January 15, 2023. I've been a ranger here for 12 years. I know every trail, every landmark, and every animal in these woods. But what I encountered that night was different. This is my complete account, written 24 hours after the incident. It started as a standard patrol. The weather report showed clear skies, temperature around 28 degrees Celsius, with 6 inches of fresh snow from the afternoon. I began my route at 11:30 p.m., driving up to the Hurricane Ridge parking area. The moon was full. Visibility was excellent. I parked my truck and started my usual walkthrough. The snow crunched under my boots. My breath came out in white puffs. The air smelled clean and sharp. Everything seemed normal. At 12:15 a.m., I noticed the first unusual sign. Fresh tracks in the snow, heading east into the forest. They weren't from any animal I recognized. Each print was about 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. The stride length measured nearly 6 feet. I took photos and measurements. The tracks were clearly fresh. The edges were sharp, not rounded by wind or melting. Whatever made them had passed through less than an hour ago. I radioed base to log my position and the finding. Base, this is Erickson at Hurricane Ridge. Found unusual tracks heading east from the parking area. Going to investigate. Over. Copy that, Erickson. Keep us updated. Over. I followed the tracks. They led away from the maintained trails into denser forest. The moonlight created sharp shadows between the trees. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, reflecting off the snow. The silence hit me first. No owl calls. No rustling of small animals, just the sound of my boots and breathing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. At 12:45 a.m. I heard the first branch snap. It came from about 100 yards ahead, not the light crack of a falling branch. This was the sound of something large moving through the forest. I stopped, turned off my flashlight, let my eyes adjust to the moonlight. The silence grew heavier. My heart rate increased. Sweat formed under my winter gear despite the cold. Another crack, closer now, then another. Whatever was moving through the forest was big, and it was moving deliberately. I reached for my radio. Base, Erickson here. Hearing movement in the forest. Large animal. Position is approximately half-mile east of parking area. Over. Static answered. Just static. I checked the radio. The battery was full. But something was blocking the signal. The movement ahead stopped. Complete silence fell again. I stood absolutely still, controlling my breathing. Years of wilderness experience told me to stay quiet and assess the situation. That's when I saw it. A dark shape moving between the trees, about 50 yards ahead. The moonlight wasn't enough to see details, but I could make out the height. It stood at least 8 feet tall. Maybe taller. The shape moved again. Its gait was smooth, bipedal, not a bear, not an elk, not anything I'd seen in 12 years of ranger work. I slowly reached for my camera. The shape stopped moving. In the silence I heard deep, rhythmic breathing, not animal panting, not human breathing, something in between. The smell hit me next. Strong, musty, like wet fur mixed with something else. Something I couldn't identify. The odor grew stronger. The thing was moving closer. My hands shook as I raised the camera. The autofocus whirred in the silence. The sound echoed between the trees. The shape turned, directly toward me. 2 eyes reflected my camera's focus light. They were set high, at least 7 feet off the ground. They glowed amber in the darkness. I pressed the shutter. The flash exploded across the snow. For a split second I saw it clearly. It stood upright, massive shoulders, long arms, dark fur covering its entire body. The face, almost human, but not human at all. The eyes locked onto mine. Then it moved, fast, impossibly fast for something that size. Branches snapped. Snow flew. The ground shook with each step. It wasn't running away. It was coming toward me. I turned and ran, dropped the camera, grabbed my bear spray. My boots pounded against the snow. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned in the cold air. The footsteps behind me grew louder, faster. The smell grew stronger. I could hear its breathing. Deep, powerful breaths. Getting closer. I didn't look back, just ran. My training kicked in. I counted landmarks, remembered my route, focused on getting back to the parking area. A roar split the night. Not a bear roar, not a cougar, nothing I'd ever heard before. The sound vibrated in my chest, made my teeth rattle, primal, ancient. The parking area appeared ahead. Moonlight reflected off my truck's windshield. 50 yards, 40, 30, another roar. Closer now. The ground shook with each impact behind me. 20 yards, 10. I reached the truck, hands shaking, keys fumbled, got the door open, jumped inside, slammed the door. Locks engaged. Through the windshield I saw it, standing at the forest edge. The moonlight revealed its full height, at least 9 feet tall, maybe more, massive chest heaving with each breath. We stared at each other. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Its eyes never left mine. Intelligence in those eyes, not animal intelligence, something else. Then it turned, moved back into the forest, each step deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I started the truck, hands still shaking. Radio crackled to life. Base to Erickson. Do you copy? Over. Erickson here. I need to report an incident. Over. Copy that. Are you safe? Over. Yes. I'm at the parking area, but you need to send someone. Need to document this. Over. What exactly are we documenting? Over. I looked at the forest edge, at the huge tracks in the snow, at the broken branches marking the thing's path. Everything. We need to document everything. Over. 2 other rangers arrived 30 minutes later. We photographed the tracks, measured the broken branches, collected hair samples caught on the bark, found my dropped camera. The photos showed only a dark blur, but the physical evidence remained. The tracks, the hair, the broken branches 9 feet off the ground, the lingering smell. I've written this account immediately following the incident. Every detail is fresh, every measurement verified, every observation confirmed by other rangers. I know what I saw. I know what chased me. But my report will say unidentified large mammal. That's all I can officially write. The evidence has been catalogued, the photos filed, the incident logged. But I know what I encountered that night. I know that something else lives in these woods, something that was here long before us, something that watches, waits, remains hidden. I still patrol Hurricane Ridge, still walk those trails, but never alone, never at night. And I always watch the tree line, always listen for that silence, that complete, heavy silence that means something is watching. The tracks appear occasionally, always at night, always after fresh snow, leading into the forest, into the darkness, where something waits, something that doesn't want to be found. This is my account. Every word true, every detail accurate. Take it as you will. But if you're ever in these woods at night and the silence falls and you smell that strange musty odor, don't take pictures. Don't follow the tracks. Just leave. Leave quickly. Leave quietly, because sometimes they follow you back. End of official account. Sven Eriksson, Olympic National Park Ranger. January 16th, 2023. It started as just another late shift in the Cascadia National Park. I had taken plenty of night patrols over the past 3 years. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of security and routine. Drive down the trail, park, walk a bit, repeat, scan the trees, the dirt, the shadows. And it was all normal that night until it wasn't. The radio was unusually quiet, nothing but static now and then. I was in the middle of an area we called 3 Pines, because of the way these tall, old trees formed a perfect little triangle. I had just parked the Jeep, headlights off, with only my flashlight to light my way. I stepped out, and the first thing that hit me was the silence. Total silence. No wind, no rustle, no chirping. I scanned the area. The 3 pines were towering over me, shadows long and dark. The air was cold, damp. My breath was visible in the beam of my flashlight. Something felt off, and it wasn't just the quiet. I shrugged it off, tried to act normal, and started my usual walk. As I moved away from the jeep, I noticed the ground was soft from the rain earlier in the week. My boots sank slightly into the mud with each step, leaving deep tracks. I remember thinking I would need to be careful not to slip. My flashlight cut through the dark, tracing the outline of bushes, shrubs, branches. Then I saw them. Tracks. The prints were large, deep, way bigger than any boot I had seen. Wider, longer. My brain tried to connect them to an animal I knew. A bear, maybe. But no. These were different. The toes were distinct. 5 of them. And they looked human, but massive. I stood there just staring at those prints for a few seconds. My pulse picked up a bit, the steady thump in my chest getting faster. I scanned the area with my light again, tracing along the path of those prints. They led away from the jeep, into the woods. I had this itch, this urge, to follow. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. But I started walking. The air got colder as I moved deeper. I could hear my own breathing now, steady but loud in the quiet. I tried to stay focused, but my ears were straining, listening for anything. A crack, a shuffle, anything. The tracks were easy to follow at first, deep impressions in the mud. I kept my light on them, step after step. About 50 yards in, the trail changed. The ground got firmer. There were patches of fallen leaves, the kind that muffled footsteps. The prints got harder to see. I found myself slowing down, looking more carefully. My flashlight flicked back and forth, scanning the ground, the trees, everything. It was then that I felt it. That feeling of being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I froze. My eyes darted around, trying to catch something, anything. I turned the flashlight in a slow circle. Nothing moved. The trees were just dark outlines against the black sky. My heart was thudding now, and my breath felt too loud, too obvious. I whispered under my breath, just trying to calm myself. "It's fine, Logan, it's fine." But it didn't feel fine. I took a deep breath and kept moving. Step, step, 1 foot in front of the other. My mind was racing with thoughts I didn't want to think. If it was a bear, I'd hear it. If it was a person, they'd have made themselves known. But there was nothing. The silence was crushing. I pushed forward, but my pace was slower now. My gut was telling me to go back, but my head was stubborn, so I kept going. That's when I heard it. A snap, sharp, like a branch breaking under weight. It came from somewhere to my right. My whole body went stiff, and I swung the flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Just shadows, trees. I kept the beam steady, eyes locked on the darkness beyond it. My breathing felt stuck in my chest, and for a long second, I didn't move. Then I saw it. A shape, just at the edge of the light. It was tall, wider than a person. It moved fast, slipping between 2 trees and vanishing before I could fully process it. I stumbled back, my boot catching on a root, and I nearly went down. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline rushing in a way I hadn't felt before. I took a step back, then another. My flashlight shook slightly, the beam flickering over branches and trunks as I scanned for the thing I saw. There was nothing now, but I knew I wasn't alone. My gut twisted with a kind of primal fear, the kind that tells you to get out, to run. I turned and started back toward the jeep, trying not to break into a full-on sprint. The path was rough, and I kept my flashlight pointed down just enough to avoid tripping. I could hear my own footsteps, the thud of my boots against the dirt and leaves. And then I heard it again, Another snap, closer this time. My pace picked up, almost running. The jeep was up ahead, parked just where I'd left it. I could see it now, the shape of it in the distance, a dull outline in the darkness. I pushed forward, almost tripping again, my breath coming in gasps. I reached the door, yanked it open, and practically threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it. The silence inside the jeep was deafening. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the keys and twisted them in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I turned the headlights on, aiming them at the tree line where I had just come from. For a second, nothing moved. The woods were still, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. I scanned the edge of the light, eyes darting from one shadow to the next. And then, just as I was about to let out a breath, I saw it. A figure. Tall, dark, standing just at the edge of the headlights, half in shadow, half lit. It was massive, broader than any person, covered in dark hair. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't wait. I put the jeep in reverse, the tires skidding slightly in the mud as I backed up, then spun the wheel and took off down the trail. The headlights bounced as the jeep hit bumps, trees blurring past me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure chasing after me. But there was nothing, just darkness swallowing the path behind me. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, until I could see the main road up ahead. I pulled over once I hit the asphalt, my hands still gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I tried to catch my breath, my chest heaving. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I had seen. My gut told me it wasn't human, it wasn't a bear. It was something else. I grabbed the radio, called into dispatch. My voice sounded strange, shaky. I just told them I was done with the patrol, that I was heading back in. They asked if everything was all right, and I said it was, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The rest of the drive back, I kept checking the mirrors, kept scanning the sides of the road. Every shadow felt like it was moving, every sound felt like a threat. By the time I made it back to the station, I was exhausted. My head was pounding, and my hands were still shaking when I killed the engine. I sat there for a minute, just staring out into the dark, trying to calm myself, trying to tell myself that it was nothing, that maybe I was just seeing things. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen something out there, something real. I stepped out of the jeep, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The station was quiet, the lights on inside casting a warm glow through the windows. I walked in, nodded to the guy at the desk. He gave me a look, raised an eyebrow. "You all right, Logan?" he asked. I just nodded. "Yeah, long night." I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. Not that night, not after. I just filed my report like always, made it sound routine. But I knew. And every time I went back out there, every time I saw the 3 pines in the distance, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched, of something out there, just beyond the light, something waiting. Weeks passed after that night, and I couldn't shake it. I'd catch myself staring at those same muddy prints I remembered from the night of the encounter. In my mind, they grew bigger, more detailed every time I thought of them. I started second-guessing every crack of a branch, every distant rustle of leaves. I couldn't escape the feeling, that creeping unease, like a shadow that followed me everywhere. One day, I was assigned another night patrol through that same part of the park. My stomach sank the moment I saw the shift posted. I thought about trading with someone, making up some excuse, but something kept me from doing it. Maybe pride. Maybe just a need to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. I packed up like usual, took the keys, and hit the road as the sun dipped below the horizon. The drive out there was uneventful. I kept the radio on, mostly for the company. As I got closer, the chatter died off, just the crackle of static, and my own breathing filling the Jeep. I pulled up to the 3 Pines and parked, just like before. The place looked the same, but different. It felt heavier somehow, like the shadows were thicker, the dark even darker. I sat in the Jeep for a while, the engine off, just listening. My fingers drummed on the steering wheel, my eyes scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The air was cold again, that same biting chill that seeped into my bones. I started my patrol, moving slowly, eyes on the ground. I didn't want to see those prints again, but part of me couldn't help but look for them. Every step felt like it echoed, even on the soft earth. About 15 minutes in, I heard it. A snap. The same sharp crack of a branch breaking. I froze, my flashlight darting towards the sound. There was nothing there, just trees and darkness. My heart started pounding again, and I forced myself to move, to keep going. I made it another 50 yards or so before I heard it again, closer this time. My hand tightened on the flashlight, my breath catching in my throat. I turned slowly, the beam of light cutting through the dark, and then I saw it. The figure, just like before. Tall, broad, covered in dark hair. It was standing still, just watching me. My pulse raced, fear flooding through me like ice. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The figure shifted, moving slightly, and I finally snapped out of it. I turned and started walking back towards the Jeep, my steps quick, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if it was following me. My heart hammered in my chest, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the flashlight steady. I made it back to the Jeep, practically threw myself inside and locked the doors. My fingers fumbled with the keys, finally getting them in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I turned the headlights on, aiming them at the trees. The figure was gone. The woods were empty, the shadows long and still. I sat there breathing hard, my hands gripping the wheel so tight it hurt. I didn't wait this time. I put the Jeep in drive and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if it was still there, watching me. I just drove, the dark trees blurring past, the road winding away from that place. My heart didn't slow down until I saw the lights of the station up ahead. When I got back, I didn't say anything. I just parked, got out, and walked inside. The guy at the desk gave me a look, but I ignored him. I went straight to the locker room, sat down on the bench, and just breathed. My hands were still shaking, my mind racing. I knew what I had seen, knew it was real, and I knew I wasn't going back out there again. Not alone, not ever. The story of that night still sticks with me. Every time I hear a noise in the dark, every time I catch movement out of the corner of my eye, I think of it. That figure, those eyes watching me from the shadows. I don't know what it was. I don't think I want to know. But I know one thing for sure. There's something out there, deep in those woods. Something big. Something that doesn't want to be found. And if you're ever out there in the dark, and you hear that snap of a branch, that rustle of leaves, take my advice. Don't look. Don't stop. Just keep moving, and get out while you still can. I never intended to photograph it. I was there for the sunrise. Just another morning shoot in the Olympic National Forest. I'd done this 100 times before. Wake up at 3 a.m., drive to the location, set up before dawn, wait for the perfect light. My camera gear was heavy. 2 Canon R5 bodies, 5 lenses, tripod, filters, standard wildlife photography kit. I'd picked this spot 3 days earlier. Perfect view of the valley, good sightlines, clear foreground. The forecast promised fog, atmospheric conditions. I parked at the trailhead at 4:15 a.m. No other cars, normal for that hour. The temperature was 45 degrees, light wind from the northwest. Optimal conditions for morning fog. I checked my gear one last time, started the hike in. The trail was well maintained. 20 minutes to my spot. Headlamp showed the way. The forest was quiet. Normal pre-dawn silence. A few early birds. Nothing unusual. I'd done this walk dozens of times. My location was a small clearing on a rise. Good elevation for valley shots. I started setting up. Main camera on the tripod. 70-200mm lens for the initial shots. Wide angle ready for when the light changed. Everything by routine. First light was due at 5:20. I had 30 minutes. The fog was rolling in as predicted. Perfect conditions. I took test shots, checked my settings, adjusted the tripod, standard procedure. The first sign was my second camera. It was set to take periodic shots. Time-lapse setup. The screen showed motion warnings, something moving at the edge of frame. I checked the shots. Just darkness. The flash hadn't fired. Didn't want to disturb the natural light. I heard it then. Movement in the trees. Heavy. Deliberate. Not a deer. Too controlled. Not a bear. Too high up. The sound came from about 20 feet up, where the fog was thickest. My hands moved automatically. Second camera up. 400mm lens. High ISO. I shot blind into the fog. The autofocus struggled, kept losing its target. Something was moving up there. Something big. The branches swayed. No wind now. The movement was purposeful, like something was testing each branch, checking its weight, moving with thought, with intelligence. I kept shooting, both cameras now, different angles, different focal lengths. The fog started to thin. First light was minutes away. That's when I got the first clear frame. It was just a shadow at first, a dark mass moving between trees. The next frame showed more. An arm, massive, muscled, covered in dark hair. The fingers wrapped around a branch thicker than my waist. The branch didn't even bend. My breath caught, hands shaking. But training took over. I kept shooting, changed cards, fresh batteries, documented everything. The movement continued, more deliberate now, like it knew it was being watched. The fog thinned more, dawn light starting to penetrate. I got 3 clear frames in sequence. The shape was unmistakable, bipedal, huge, at least 8 feet tall. Proportions all wrong for a human, too broad, too powerful. It moved like a climber, each movement planned, efficient, no wasted energy. The muscles shifted under the hair. Dark fur, but not black, more brown. Grey patches on the back. The head was hidden in shadow. But I saw the eyes. They caught the first ray of dawn. Deep set, dark, intelligent, looking right at my camera, right at me. I've photographed predators before. Bears, mountain lions. These eyes were different. There was awareness there, consciousness. I kept shooting, hands steady now, adrenaline focusing me. The creature moved again, fast, too fast for its size. The branches barely moved. It crossed 30 feet in seconds, always staying just at the edge of clear visibility. The sun broke the horizon. Light flooded the valley. My original shot forgotten. I followed the movement, got 12 more frames, each one partial. A hand here, a leg there, one full torso shot through the branches. Then it was gone. The forest stayed quiet. No birds, no small animals, just the sound of my shutter clicking at empty branches. I waited an hour. Nothing moved. Finally, my hands started shaking. Delayed reaction. I packed up slowly, kept both cameras ready. Nothing appeared. The forest gradually came back to life. Birds first, then squirrels. Normal sounds returning. But I kept checking the trees, kept looking up. The walk back took twice as long. I stopped every few minutes, looked behind me, above me. Nothing followed. No sounds except my own footsteps. I reached the car. Hands shook so bad I dropped my keys. I drove straight to my studio, downloaded the cards, both of them. 847 shots total. Most showed nothing. Dark trees, empty branches, but 47 frames showed something. 7 were clear enough to analyze. I'm a professional, have been for 15 years. I know every animal in these woods, know how they move, how they look. This was different. The proportions were impossible for a human, the movement too skilled for a costume, the muscles too defined for any known primate. I called colleagues, experts I trust, sent them the clearest shots. Their responses varied: disbelief, excitement, scientific interest. But none could explain what it was, what I had captured. The fur color was wrong for known primates. The muscle structure suggested a strength beyond any recorded species. The movement pattern showed intelligence, planning, awareness of the cameras. I enhanced the images, cleaned them up. The details became clearer. The hand had dermal ridges, like human fingerprints but different pattern. The fur showed guard hairs consistent with primate species, but larger. The joint articulation suggested bipedal adaptation. One shot showed scale. The creature's hand wrapped around a branch I could measure. 22 inches of branch diameter. The fingers spanned it easily. The muscle definition suggested casual strength. No strain in the grip. I've kept the photos private, made copies, stored them separately. The originals are in a safe, raw files preserved, metadata intact, everything documented, everything verifiable. Some photos I'll never publish. The ones showing the eyes. The intelligence there was too human, too aware. Those stay private. Some things deserve their privacy. Even in these woods, I still shoot that location. Different times now. Random schedules. Always 2 cameras. Always ready. It hasn't appeared again. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the light is just right, I see movement in the trees. Deliberate, intelligent, waiting. My cameras stay ready, memory cards empty. But I don't chase those shadows anymore. Don't try to catch another perfect frame. Some subjects choose when to be photographed, when to be seen. The scientific community would want proof, clear shots, full documentation. I have those shots, have that proof, but it stays in my safe. Some creatures deserve their mysteries, deserve to choose their moments. I've spent my career documenting wildlife, revealing nature's secrets. But some secrets aren't mine to share. Some photos stay private. Some subjects deserve their freedom. The morning light still calls me. I still chase the perfect shot. But now I shoot with different eyes, watch the edges of the frame, the spaces between branches, and sometimes in the early fog, when the light is just right, I see movement. Deliberate, intelligent, free. I keep shooting, keep watching. But some photos will never see light. Some subjects deserve their shadows, their privacy, their mystery. That's the choice I made. That's the story that stays in my safe. The next generation of photographers will seek their proof, chase their perfect shot. But they won't find it in my files. Some stories belong to the forest. Some images remain unshared. That's my choice. That's my responsibility to what I saw, to what saw me back. I am Yuki Tanaka, a wildlife photographer based in Sapporo. I've spent 15 years photographing Hokkaido's wildlife, bears, deer, foxes. I know their habits, their movements, their patterns. But on October 3rd, 2023, I photographed something else, something I still can't explain. The morning started at 4:30 a.m. I packed my gear, Canon EOS R5, 100-500mm lens, tripod, emergency supplies, standard equipment for wildlife photography. Weather forecast showed fog, temperature around 45°C, perfect conditions for atmospheric shots. I drove to my usual spot in the Daisetsuzan National Park. The location was remote, a small clearing near the tree line, elevation about 5,000 feet. I'd photographed bears there before. The morning mist always settled perfectly in the valley. I arrived at 5:45 a.m. The fog was thick. Visibility extended maybe 30 yards. I set up my equipment at the clearing's edge. The grass was wet with dew. Birds started their morning calls. Everything seemed normal. The first light appeared at 6:15 a.m. I started taking test shots. The fog created perfect diffusion. The ISO was set to 800, shutter speed at 1250, aperture at f5.6, standard settings for low-light wildlife photography. At 6:30 a.m., the birds stopped singing. All at once, complete silence fell. In 15 years of wildlife photography, I'd never experienced such sudden quiet. I checked my camera settings again, adjusted the focus points, scanned the tree line through my viewfinder. The fog shifted and swirled. Dark shapes of trees emerged and disappeared. The smell hit me first. Strong, musty, like wet fur, but different. Not bear, not deer, something else. The odor grew stronger. My nose wrinkled, my eyes watered. Movement caught my attention, something large moving through the fog. I raised my camera, started shooting. The autofocus struggled in the mist. The shape emerged clearer. It walked upright, tall, very tall. My first thought was bear, but the movement was wrong. Bears don't walk like that, not on two legs, not with that smooth gait. I kept shooting. The camera clicked rapidly. The shape moved slowly across my field of view, about 40 yards away. The fog swirled around it, but I could see the height, at least 8 feet, maybe more. The arms swung naturally, like a person walking, but the proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the shoulders too wide. Dark fur covered the body, not bear fur, different, denser. My hands started shaking. Sweat formed on my forehead despite the cold. But I kept shooting. Years of experience took over. Track, focus, shoot. Track, focus, shoot. The shape stopped, turned its head toward me. 2 eyes reflected the early morning light. High up, way too high for a bear. The head was large, almost human-like, but not human at all. I zoomed in, 500 millimeter, full extension. The autofocus locked on. I saw details now. The face, the eyes, the massive brow ridge, the wide nose, the powerful jaw. It stared directly at me, not like an animal stares. Different. There was recognition, understanding, intelligence. My finger kept pressing the shutter. The camera clicked and whirred, every detail recorded, every moment captured. Then it moved, fast, impossibly fast for something that size. The fog swirled violently, trees shook, branches snapped. It wasn't running away, it was coming toward me. The smell grew overwhelming. My eyes burned, my throat tightened. The ground vibrated with each step. Getting closer, faster. I grabbed my tripod, left the backpack, ran. The fog swallowed everything. I couldn't see the trail, couldn't see the trees, just grey mist and dark shapes. The footsteps behind me grew louder. Heavy impacts shook the ground. The smell grew stronger. I could hear breathing, deep, powerful breaths, getting closer. A sound cut through the fog, not a roar, not a growl, a deep, resonant call, like nothing I'd ever heard. The sound vibrated in my chest, made my teeth rattle. I ran faster, my lungs burned, the tripod banged against my leg, branches whipped my face, but I kept running. The footsteps followed, closer, closer. The fog thinned slightly. I recognized a landmark, a large boulder. The trail was nearby. My car was parked 100 yards down that trail. Another call echoed through the fog. Closer now, much closer. The impact shook my whole body. 50 yards to the car, 40, 30. I reached the trail, stumbled, caught myself, kept running. The car appeared in the fog. 20 yards, 10. My hands shook as I pressed the key fob. The lights flashed. The locks clicked. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, slammed it shut. Through the windshield, I saw it, standing at the trail's edge. The fog swirled around its massive frame, 9 feet tall at least, chest heaving with each breath. Those eyes, those intelligent eyes, still locked on mine. We stared at each other, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The windows fogged up from my breathing. My heart pounded against my ribs. Then it turned, stepped back into the fog, each movement deliberate, powerful, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I started the car. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I drove straight to the park ranger station, showed them the camera. The photos were unclear. The fog obscured most details, but some shots showed something. A dark figure, upright, tall, those eyes reflecting the morning light. The rangers took statements, measured footprints we found later. Huge prints, 16 inches long, 8 inches wide, 6-foot stride length. They collected hair samples from broken branches. Dark, coarse hair, not bear, not deer, not anything they recognized. I've developed the photos, enhanced them, analyzed them. Some details are clear: the height, the proportions, the way it moved, the eyes. Professional wildlife photographers learn to document everything: distance, time, weather conditions, animal behavior. I documented everything that morning, every detail, every measurement, every observation. The official report says, unidentified large mammal. That's what I had to write. That's what the rangers wrote. But we all know what we saw, what I photographed. I still go to that clearing, still take photos at dawn. But now I bring a partner. Watch the fog more carefully. Listen for that sudden silence. Smell the air. The photos are locked in my safe, the negatives secured, the digital files backed up. Evidence of something, something that lives in these mountains, something that watches, waits, remains hidden. But sometimes, in the early morning fog, when the birds go silent and that smell fills the air, I raise my camera and wait, because I know it's out there, watching, always watching. This is my account, every detail true, every observation accurate. The photos exist, the evidence exists, make of it what you will. But if you're ever in these mountains at dawn, and the fog rolls in, and the birds stop singing, don't raise your camera. Don't try to get closer. Pack your gear. Leave quickly. Leave quietly. Because sometimes they don't just watch. Sometimes they follow. End of official account. Yuki Tanaka, wildlife photographer. October 4th, 2023. Camping alone wasn't new to me. I liked the quiet, the kind of silence that stretches across the wilderness when you're far from everything. It was just me, a small tent, and the night sky. I set up camp near a lake deep in the Adirondack Mountains. That day, I'd hiked more than 10 miles and was exhausted. The lake shimmered as the sun went down, and I knew I had picked the right spot. I had dinner by the fire, nothing fancy, just a freeze-dried meal I'd brought with me. The air turned colder as the night wore on, so I bundled up in a flannel and sat close to the flames. The crackle of burning wood was the only sound, and I felt my body finally relax. I'd come out here to disconnect, get away from work, the city, people. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. It must have been around midnight when I woke up. At first, I didn't know what had pulled me from sleep. I lay there in my sleeping bag, blinking into the dark, my breath misting up inside the tent. It was cold, colder than before, and there was something else, something beyond the chill that made the hair on my arms stand up. I heard it then, a sound, slow, deliberate steps moving around my tent. It wasn't an animal. The weight was too heavy. The steps were steady too. Not a deer, not a bear. It sounded like a person, but it was wrong somehow, too deliberate. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I didn't dare move. My body went rigid, my breath caught in my throat. I listened, straining to hear, my ears working overtime. Whoever or whatever it was, they were circling my tent. I heard the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. I shut my eyes tight, my body trying to will itself to disappear. My mind raced with thoughts I didn't want to have. Should I call out? Should I unzip the tent and look? The answer felt clear. No. Do not let it know you're awake. The footsteps moved to the back of the tent. I could hear it clearly, just inches away, the thin fabric the only thing between us. My breathing was shallow, quiet, my hand gripping my flashlight that lay next to me, though I didn't dare turn it on. The shadows outside were moving, slowly, deliberately. The shape blocked the moonlight, and I could see the outline shift along the fabric of the tent. It was tall, taller than I had expected. I swallowed hard, trying to make no noise, not even a rustle of my sleeping bag. Then the smell hit me. It was rank, like wet fur, mixed with something else, something rotten. It was overwhelming, and my eyes watered. I wanted to gag, but I forced it back down, keeping myself still. The steps slowed, then stopped. The silence felt deafening, my ears straining against it, my heartbeat loud in my head. And then there was a sound I will never forget, a low, guttural noise, almost like a grunt but deeper, not a growl, but close. It sent chills down my spine, my skin crawling. Whatever was out there wasn't human. I knew it in my gut. My hands started to sweat, and my fingers tightened around the flashlight, though I still didn't turn it on. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds. The thing started moving again, away from the tent, the footsteps growing quieter until there was nothing. Just the stillness of the night, broken by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I stayed there, frozen, not daring to move, every muscle in my body tense and ready to spring. My eyes were open, staring at nothing, my ears straining for any sound that would tell me it was coming back. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't stay still any longer, I reached for my phone. Slowly, carefully, I slipped my hand out of the sleeping bag, grabbed it, and brought it to my face. The screen was almost blinding in the dark, and I quickly lowered the brightness. It was 3:17 in the morning. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal, no bars, no way to reach out. I was alone. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my fear in check. I couldn't stay in the tent. I needed to get out of there. But the thought of unzipping the tent, of stepping outside into the darkness where that thing had just been, it made my chest tighten with panic. My body was screaming at me to stay put, to stay hidden, but I couldn't. I knew that. I had to move. Slowly, I unzipped the sleeping bag, the noise sounding impossibly loud to my ears. I winced, pausing, listening. Nothing. I kept going, inch by inch, until I was free. I moved to my knees, the flashlight still in my hand, though I kept it off. I reached for the zipper of the tent, my fingers trembling. The zipper was stuck for a second and my heart skipped a beat. I tugged it gently, trying not to make too much noise. It gave way, and I slowly opened it, just enough to peek outside. The night was dark, but the moonlight glinted off the lake, casting a silvery glow over the campsite. I scanned the area, looking for movement, for anything that shouldn't be there. Nothing moved. The campfire was nothing more than a few glowing embers, the warmth long gone. My breath came out in misty puffs, and I could still smell that rank odor, though it was fainter now. I pushed the tent flap open further, sticking my head out, my eyes darting around. Still nothing. I crawled out, moving slowly, staying low. My legs felt shaky as I stood, and I glanced around again, the world feeling too big, too exposed. I reached back into the tent, grabbing my pack. I didn't bother packing everything up. I just needed to get out, to move, to put distance between me and whatever was out there. I slung the pack over my shoulders, grabbed my flashlight, and turned it on, keeping the beam low to the ground. I didn't want to draw attention, but I also didn't want to stumble around in the dark. My feet crunched on the leaves as I moved, every sound making my heart jump. I headed toward the lake, keeping it on my right, planning to follow it until I reached the main trail. Every few steps, I stopped, listening. The night felt too quiet. No insects, no rustling of small animals, just the wind and the soft lapping of water against the shore. My ears strained, listening for the footsteps, for the grunt, for anything that might tell me it was following. The trail was hard to find in the dark, the flashlight barely cutting through the shadows. I moved slowly, deliberately, my senses on high alert. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my breath quick, my pulse pounding. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it, that sensation of eyes on me, of something watching from just beyond the edge of the light. I don't know how far I walked. Maybe a mile, maybe less. My legs were aching, my hands cold and stiff. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I needed to rest, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Not yet. Not while that thing was still out there. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I went down hard, the flashlight flying out of my hand. Pain shot up my knee, and I gasped, biting back a cry. I scrambled forward, grabbing the flashlight, the beam flickering as it rolled. I froze then, the light catching on something. Eyes, reflective, glowing in the beam. They were far away, but they were there, just beyond the tree line, watching. My chest tightened, my breath coming in short gasps. I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain in my knee, and kept moving, faster now, almost running. The trail twisted, winding through the woods, the trees closing in on either side. I kept the flashlight pointed ahead, my eyes darting from side to side, looking for movement. The eyes were gone, but I could still feel them, the feeling of being hunted. My body was running on pure fear, each step feeling heavier, my legs aching. Eventually, I saw it, the outline of the main trailhead sign, barely visible in the dark. Relief washed over me, almost bringing me to my knees. I knew once I reached that point, the road wasn't far. There'd be more space, fewer places for something to hide. I stumbled forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my vision blurring with exhaustion. I reached the trailhead, leaning against the sign, my body trembling. I shone the flashlight back the way I had come, scanning the darkness. Nothing, just shadows and trees. But the feeling was still there. I couldn't shake it, that sense of being watched, followed. I turned, limping down the dirt road, each step feeling like a small victory. The sky was starting to lighten, just barely, the first hint of dawn. I kept moving, not stopping until I saw the glint of my car parked off the road. I almost cried then, the sight of it filling me with a kind of desperate hope. I made it. I was almost safe. I reached the car, fumbling for the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock the door. I threw the pack in the back, climbed in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, my body trembling from head to toe. My knee throbbed, my hands ached, but I was alive. I started the car, the engine loud in the quiet morning, and I turned onto the road, not looking back. I drove, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something step out onto the road behind me. But there was nothing. Just the empty, winding road and the growing light of dawn. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, until the sun was fully up and the forest was far behind me. I pulled over at a small gas station, my body exhausted, my mind numb. I sat there in the car, staring at nothing, my hands still gripping the wheel. I didn't know what I had seen, what had been out there. But I knew it was real. And I knew I would never camp alone again. Since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling of those eyes on me. Even in my apartment, with the doors locked and the city bustling outside, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, ears straining for those footsteps, that grunt, that smell. I haven't told anyone. I'm not sure anyone would believe me. I think about going back sometimes, just to prove to myself that it was nothing, that it was all in my head. but I can't. Every time I think about it, my chest tightens, my breath catches, and I see those eyes again, glowing in the dark, watching. And I know I'll never go back. Not there. Not alone. It took me 30 years of hunting to learn fear. Real fear. Not the excitement of tracking a bull elk. Not the tension of a close shot. Pure animal fear. The kind that turns your blood to ice and makes your body forget how to move. I was hunting elk in northern Idaho. Late season. November. I know these woods better than my own backyard. 30 years of experience. Hundreds of successful hunts. I had a reputation as the best guide in 3 states. Nothing in these woods could surprise me. I was wrong. The morning started normal. 20 degrees at dawn. Light snow from the night before. Perfect tracking conditions. I'd set up my blind 3 days earlier. Good spot. Natural clearing. Fresh elk sign. Everything by the book. My blind was solid. Built it myself. 8-foot lumber posts sunk 2 feet deep. Heavy canvas walls. Metal roof. Been using the same design for 20 years. Never had a problem. It could handle any weather, any animal. At least that's what I thought. I left camp at 4 a.m. Standard procedure. The walk to the blind took 40 minutes. No flashlight. I know these trails by feel. The snow crunched under my boots. Quarter moon provided enough light. Everything was quiet. Normal quiet. Winter forest quiet. First sign something was wrong was the smell. Hit me 50 yards out. Sharp. Musky. Not bear. Not elk. Nothing I'd smelled in 30 years of hunting. Made my nose burn. Made my eyes water. I approached slower. Rifle ready. Scope already mounted. The blind was just ahead. Moon cast enough light to see outlines. Something was wrong with the shape. The roofline was wrong. Too low. Too broken. I got closer. 15 yards. Close enough to see clearly. My hands went cold. Throat went dry. The blind was destroyed. Not collapsed. Not weather damaged. Destroyed. The 8-inch posts were snapped. Not broken by weather. Not rotted. Snapped clean. Like twigs. The metal roof was crushed. Bent like paper. The canvas was shredded. Not torn by claws. Not ripped by weather. Methodically pulled apart. I've seen bear damage. Seen what grizzlies can do. This was different. The destruction was systematic. Deliberate. Everything was dismantled. Examined. Like something had studied how it was built. Then took it apart. My hunting seat, 3-inch thick oak beam, was broken in half. Clean break. No splinters. Just pure force. The barrel rest was twisted. 1/2-inch steel rod bent into a spiral. Not by tools. By hands. The snow showed the story. Prints everywhere. But wrong. All wrong. Bipedal. Huge. 18 inches long at least. Deep in the hard snow. The stride length was impossible. 8 feet between prints. Perfect balance. Perfect line. I've tracked every animal in these woods. Red sign for 30 years. These tracks showed intelligence, purpose. The creature had circled the blind, studied it, then systematically destroyed it. Not from anger, from curiosity. The tracks led to the trees. That's when I noticed the silence. Complete silence. No birds, no small animals. Nothing. 30 years in these woods, and I'd never heard silence like this. My breath sounded too loud. My heartbeat felt wrong. Movement caught my eye. Up high. 20 feet at least. A branch moved. No wind. The movement was controlled. Deliberate. Something massive shifted in the darkness above. The branch was thick. 8 inches at least. It didn't even creak. The smell got stronger. That sharp, musky odor. My eyes watered worse. Training kicked in. I raised my rifle. Scope useless in the dark. The movement continued, branch to branch, always just out of clear sight, always 20 feet up. A sound broke the silence, not a growl, not an animal sound, a long, low vocalization, like speech, but not speech. Complex tones, different pitches. It came from above me. Then another answered. From behind. Different tone, different pitch, communication. My hands were shaking. Rifle felt useless. Wrong. I've faced bears, mountain lions, angry moose. Never felt fear like this. Never felt so observed, studied. The movements continued, all around now, high in the trees, multiple sources. Snow fell from the branches. The movement was so controlled, so careful. Nothing that big should move that quietly, that skillfully. I caught glimpses, dark shapes, massive shoulders, long arms, quick, too quick for their size. The vocalizations continued, complex patterns, different tones, different sources, like a conversation in an unknown language. My legs finally remembered how to move. I backed away, slow, deliberate, eyes up, always up. The shapes followed, branch to branch, 20 feet up, perfect parallel to my movement. No sound except snow falling. No sound except those complex calls. The smell followed too. Sharp, thick, making my head spin. I hit the trail, kept backing up. They stayed in the trees, just at the edge of vision. Dark shapes moving impossibly fast, impossibly quiet. The calls continued, softer now, more complex patterns. It took an hour to walk out. Should have been 20 minutes. I kept the rifle up, kept watching the trees. The shapes followed the whole way. Always just out of clear sight. Always 20 feet up, always watching. I reached my truck, hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys in the snow. The shapes stopped at the tree line, still calling, still moving. I got the door open, started the engine. The headlights caught nothing but empty branches. I drove straight through to town. 3 hours, didn't stop, didn't look back. The sun came up on empty highway. My hands didn't stop shaking until noon. I went back 2 days later. Daylight, with 2 other hunters. The blind was still destroyed. The tracks were still there, clear in the hard snow. We took photos, measurements, collected hair samples from the torn canvas. Dark hair, long, thick, not bare, not anything we knew. The lab results were inconclusive. Unknown primate hair was the official report. The photos showed the damage clearly. The tracks were perfect. 8-foot stride, 18-inch prints. Dermal ridges visible in the deep impressions. Like human prints, but not human. I've been back to those woods. Had to. It's my job, my life. But I don't hunt alone anymore. Don't set up permanent blinds. Don't stay in one spot too long. And I always watch the trees now, always look up. The other hunters ask me about it sometimes, about what happened, about what I saw. I show them the photos, show them the lab reports, show them the broken blind posts I kept. Let them make their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing. When they're in those woods and the silence falls, that complete, total silence, pack up, move out, don't look back. Some things in these woods aren't meant to be hunted. Some things are the hunters. I still guide, still hunt, still spend my days in those woods. But I hunt different now, more aware, more respectful. And when I hear those complex calls in the distance, when the silence falls and the smell hits, I leave. Immediately. No questions, no hesitation. There are things in these woods, things that watch, things that think, things that communicate, things that can snap 8-inch posts like twigs and move through treetops like shadows. They've been here longer than us. They'll be here after us. I learned fear that day, real fear, but I learned respect too. Learned that 30 years of experience means nothing to creatures that have lived here for thousands of years. Learned that being a hunter doesn't always make you the most dangerous thing in the woods. The blind stayed destroyed. I never rebuilt it. Some spots in these woods don't belong to us. Some places should stay wild. Some creatures deserve their territories, their privacy, their dominion. I still hunt, still guide, still love these woods. But I hunt differently now, move differently, think differently. and I always watch the trees. My name is Klaus Werner. I'm an experienced alpinist with 20 years of climbing experience across 4 continents. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, and wolves. But what happened on September 12, 2023, in the Cascade Mountains was different. This is my complete account, documented 12 hours after the incident. I'd been solo camping in a remote area of the North Cascades, elevation 6,500 feet. The spot was 3 miles off the nearest marked trail. Perfect weather, clear skies, half moon, temperature around 40 degrees Celsius. Standard conditions for September at that altitude. I set up camp at 4 p.m. Standard ultralight setup, MSR 1-person tent, sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees, emergency supplies. I'd done this hundreds of times. Nothing unusual about the site or the setup. The evening passed normally. I cooked dinner on my portable stove, secured the food in a bear canister, placed it 100 yards from my tent, standard wilderness protocol. No signs of large wildlife in the area, no unusual tracks, no disturbed vegetation. I went to bed at 9:30 p.m. The half moon provided good illumination. Wind was light, around 5 millimeters. Normal nighttime mountain sounds, small animals, light breeze through trees, occasional bird calls. The first unusual thing happened at 3:07 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch. Heavy footsteps circled the tent, not like a bear's 4-beat walk. This was bipedal, 2 distinct footfalls, slow, deliberate. My heart rate increased immediately. Sweat formed on my palms despite the cold. I lay completely still, controlled my breathing, kept my movements silent. Years of wilderness experience had taught me to assess before acting. The footsteps continued, slow circuits around the tent, each step pressed deep into the ground. I could feel the vibrations through my sleeping pad. The weight behind those steps was massive. I reached slowly for my headlamp, kept it off, just held it, ready. The footsteps paused at the tent's entrance. Complete silence fell. Then I heard breathing, deep, rhythmic breaths, not like a bear's snuffling, not like a person's breathing, something in between. The breaths came from high up, way too high for any normal animal. A shadow fell across the tent. The moonlight silhouetted something huge. The shape stood upright. Had to be at least 8 feet tall, probably taller. The shoulders were massive. The arms hung long at its sides. The smell hit me next, strong, musky, like wet fur but different. Not bear, not any animal I'd encountered in 20 years of mountaineering. The odor grew stronger. My eyes watered. My throat tightened. The shape moved closer. One step, another. The ground shook slightly with each impact. The tent wall pushed inward from its presence, just inches of thin nylon between us. My hands shook on the headlamp. Sweat ran down my back. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the thing could hear it. But I stayed still, absolutely still. Something touched the tent. Not a paw, not a hand, something in between. The touch was deliberate, exploring. The tent wall moved under its investigation. I heard sniffing, long, deep inhalations. It was smelling me, learning my scent. The breathing grew louder, closer, just inches away now. The touch moved up the tent wall, higher, higher. The thing had to be reaching down from its full height. The shadow on the tent showed its true size, 9 feet at least, maybe more. Minutes passed, 5, 10, 15. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Just lay there, heart pounding, hands shaking, waiting. A sound broke the silence, not a growl, not a roar, a low rumbling vocalization. The sound vibrated through my chest, made my teeth rattle, unlike anything I'd heard in 2 decades of mountain expeditions. The shadow moved, the footsteps started again, circling, but faster now, more purposeful. The impacts grew stronger. The ground shook more with each step. Another vocalization, louder this time. Then an answer, from the darkness, from the trees. Another one was out there. They called back and forth. The sounds echoed off the mountains. The circling continued, faster, closer. Both of them now. I could feel their footsteps, count their breaths, smell their presence. They moved in perfect coordination, predatory, hunting. I had to make a decision. The tent was a trap. No protection, no escape. I needed to reach my car. It was parked a mile down the trail, through dark forest, but staying meant certain contact. I grabbed my headlamp, car keys, emergency whistle, left everything else. The footsteps were at the far side of the tent, moving away. This was my chance. I burst out of the tent, clicked on the headlamp, ran. The beam bounced wildly. Trees appeared and disappeared in the light. Branches whipped my face, rocks turned under my feet. The vocalizations changed, became urgent, excited. The footsteps pursued. Heavy impacts shook the ground, getting closer, faster. The smell grew stronger, the breathing louder. I ran harder. My lungs burned in the thin air. My legs trembled with effort. But the sounds behind me grew closer. 2 sets of footsteps, 2 sets of breathing, 2 massive shapes pursuing through the darkness. The trail appeared ahead. I recognized landmarks in my bouncing light beam. 1/4 mile to the car. The footsteps were almost on me, the breathing right behind me, the smell overwhelming. I saw my car, fumbled with the keys, dropped them, grabbed them from the ground. The shapes were right there, in my peripheral vision, massive, dark, moving with impossible speed. Got the door open, dove inside, slammed it shut, locked it, started the engine. The headlights came on. They stood there, 2 of them, in the headlight beams, at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Their eyes reflected the light. Not red like animals' eyes, different, intelligent, aware. We stared at each other. 10 seconds, 20. Their chests heaved with exertion. Steam rose from their fur in the cold air. Those eyes never left mine. Then they turned, stepped into the darkness. Their movements synchronized, deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I drove straight to the ranger station, reported everything. They sent a team at first light, found my tent, shredded. The ground around it covered in prints, huge prints, 16 inches long, 8 inches wide, 6-foot stride length. They collected hair samples, dark, coarse hair, not bare, not known wildlife. They took photographs, measurements, documented everything. The official report says, unidentified large mammals. That's what the regulations require. That's what I had to write. But we know what we saw, what was out there. I still climb, still camp in remote areas, but never alone now, never in that part of the Cascades, and always with eyes on the darkness, ears alert for that silence, nose testing the air. This is my account, every detail true, every observation accurate. The evidence exists, the documentation exists. Believe what you want. But if you're camping in those mountains and you hear those footsteps in the night and you smell that strange musky odor, don't wait. Don't try to see them. Pack up. Leave immediately. Leave quietly. Because sometimes curiosity is fatal, and sometimes they hunt in pairs. End of official account. Klaus Werner, professional alpinist, September 13th, 2023. The day started like any other. It was cold, clear, and I could see my breath in the crisp morning air. I was in the middle of the woods in northern Canada, on a hunting trip. Just me, my rifle, and the silence of the wilderness. I'd set up camp about 5 miles from the nearest dirt road. Nothing fancy, just a small tent and a fire ring. The forest was thick out here, a mix of pines and thick underbrush. I liked it that way. Fewer people. More game. The morning had gone well. I tracked a group of deer for a couple of hours, moving slow, careful not to make noise. I knew the area well. I'd been coming here for years. I had my rifle ready, my eyes scanning for movement between the trees, ears open to every rustle and sound. The wind was light, just enough to move the branches overhead, and the sun barely made it through the canopy. I found a good spot to settle, a small rise overlooking a clearing where deer often came to graze. I stayed low, behind a tree, waiting. The minutes passed slowly. The cold bit at my fingers, even through my gloves. I shifted my weight, trying to stay comfortable, though comfort wasn't really an option out here. It was around midday when I heard it, a noise that didn't belong, not the rustling of leaves or the call of a bird. It was deep, a low grumble, like a growl, but not quite. I tensed, my hands tightening on the rifle. My eyes scanned the clearing, my heart rate picking up. There was nothing there, just the wind and the trees. I frowned, keeping still, listening. Then I heard it again, a deep sound, almost like a moan, coming from somewhere to my right. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It wasn't the sound a bear made. I'd heard bears before, plenty of times. This was different. I shifted my position slightly, trying to get a better angle, my finger resting on the trigger just in case. The woods had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hair on your arms stand up. No birds, no movement, just stillness, and that strange noise off to my right. I took a slow breath, my eyes narrowing as I tried to pick out any movement between the thick trunks. Then, there it was, a figure, big, massive even, moving between the trees maybe 30 yards away. It was upright, walking on two legs. My heart jumped in my chest, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. It was too tall, too broad, its shape more like a man, but wrong, too large, covered in dark fur that seemed to blend with the shadows around it. I didn't move. I just watched, my pulse pounding in my ears. The thing moved slowly, almost lazily, weaving between the trees. It didn't seem to see me, or if it did, it didn't care. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, my eyes locked on the creature. I could see its arms swinging slightly, its head turning as if scanning the forest. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. The wind shifted slightly, and suddenly I could smell it. A strong, musky odor, like something that hadn't bathed in months. It made my nose wrinkle, my stomach twist. I swallowed, trying not to gag, and kept watching. The creature kept moving, slow and deliberate, heading toward the clearing. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, my body tensing. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I take a shot? Should I stay still? Run? My finger tightened slightly on the trigger, but something inside me said no. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. I had no idea how it would react. The last thing I wanted was to provoke it. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, its head turning slightly as if listening. I could see its profile now, the broad chest, the thick arms. The face was shadowed, but I could make out the rough outline, a flat nose, deep-set eyes. It looked almost human, but not quite. Too broad, too rough. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, my breaths shallow and slow. The thing turned its head slightly, and for a split second, I thought it looked in my direction. My body went cold, my muscles locking up. But then it moved again, stepping into the clearing, its massive feet crunching over the fallen leaves. I watched, my heart in my throat, as it made its way across the clearing. It moved with purpose, but not with urgency, like it knew exactly where it was going, and it wasn't in a hurry to get there. My eyes stayed glued to it, every muscle in my body on edge, waiting. Then, without warning, it stopped. It turned its head, looking back the way it had come. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was listening to something I couldn't hear. The forest was still deathly quiet, the kind of silence that felt wrong, unnatural. The creature made a low noise then, a deep rumble that I felt more than heard. It turned again, and then, just like that, it started moving back the way it had come. Its steps were slow, deliberate, almost like it was patrolling the area. I watched until it was gone, disappearing between the trees, its shape blending into the dark shadows. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body felt stiff, my muscles aching from staying still for so long. I shifted slightly, wincing as my legs protested the movement. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. I stayed there for a while, my eyes scanning the clearing, the woods, listening for any sound. But there was nothing. Slowly, carefully, I got to my feet, my rifle still in my hands, my body tense. I needed to get back to camp. I needed to get out of these woods. I moved slowly, my eyes darting around, every sound making me jump. The forest felt different now, like I was an intruder, like I didn't belong. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves overhead, but it did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. I made it back to my camp without incident, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I packed up quickly, my hands moving almost on autopilot, my mind still reeling. The smell was still in the air, that musky, overpowering odor, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't want to stay here, not anymore. Once my gear was packed, I slung my rifle over my shoulder, grabbed my pack, and started down the trail that led back to the road. My steps were fast, my body tense, my eyes constantly scanning the woods around me. Every shadow felt like it was moving, every rustle of leaves making my heart pound harder. The trail wound through the forest, the trees thick on either side, blocking out the sun. I could feel the sweat on my back, my breathing too loud in the quiet. I tried to stay calm, to keep my focus, but my mind kept drifting back to that figure. The way it moved, the sound it made, the size of it. It wasn't something I could forget. The last mile felt like it took forever. My legs ached, my knee protesting with each step. But I kept moving, my eyes fixed ahead, the thought of the road keeping me going. Finally, I saw it. The gap in the trees, the glint of sunlight on metal. My truck was parked just where I had left it, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I didn't slow down. I made my way to the truck, threw my gear in the back, and climbed in, slamming the door behind me. I sat there for a moment, my hands on the wheel, my heart still pounding. I looked out at the woods, the trees swaying gently in the wind, and I felt a chill run through me. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and I put the truck in gear, turning onto the road. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, my hands gripping the wheel, my knuckles white. I drove until the woods were far behind me, the road winding its way back to civilization, back to safety. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if I'll ever come back to these woods. But I know one thing. There's something out there, something that doesn't want to be found. And whatever it is, it's better left alone. Sound doesn't lie. That's the first rule of field recording. Machines don't imagine things. Don't make mistakes. Don't hear what isn't there. Equipment just captures, records, documents. What I recorded that night in Redwood shouldn't exist. But it does. I have the files to prove it. I'm a field researcher specializing in bioacoustics, 15 years of experience, 3 advanced degrees, dozens of published papers. I've recorded everything from whale songs to bat echolocation, know every animal vocalization in North America, or thought I did. The setup was routine: 6 high-sensitivity microphones, 2 digital recorders, frequency analyzers, standard equipment for nocturnal sound mapping. I'd done this hundreds of times, different forests, different species, same process. The location was deep in Redwood National Forest, 5 miles from the nearest trail. Perfect isolation for clean recordings, no human interference, no traffic noise, just pure forest sounds. I started setup at dusk. Standard procedure, each microphone precisely placed, triangulated coverage, every piece of equipment tested, calibrated, ready. The first recordings would start at midnight, peak activity time for nocturnal species. The weather was ideal, no wind, clear sky, temperature steady at 52 degrees, perfect conditions for sound travel. The forest was active, normal night sounds, owls, small mammals, nothing unusual. I checked the equipment one last time at 11:45 p.m. All readings normal, all levels set. The analyzers showed standard forest background noise, everything by the book. I settled in my tent nearby, close enough to monitor, far enough not to interfere. The first anomaly came at 1:17 a.m., a spike in the low-frequency range, below normal animal vocalizations, deep, complex. The analyzers struggled to map it. The pattern was wrong, too structured, too deliberate. I checked the equipment, all functioning normally, no malfunctions, no interference. The sound came again, longer this time, 43 seconds, multiple tones, layered frequencies, like speech but not speech, too complex for animal calls, too structured for random noise. The sound had direction, came from the northeast, then another responded, northwest, different pitch, different pattern, but similar structure, similar complexity. The analyzers showed matching frequency patterns, deliberate communication. I've studied animal calls for 15 years, know every variation, every species. These were different. The complexity was wrong. The frequency range impossible for known species. The patterns showed intelligence, purpose, communication. More calls joined, different directions, different pitches, all with the same impossible complexity. The analyzers showed clear patterns, turn-taking, responses, like conversation, but in frequencies no human throat could produce, no known animal could make. The equipment started failing, one analyzer at a time, not breaking, just refusing to process. The frequencies were wrong, outside normal parameters, beyond their programming, but the recorders kept working, kept capturing. The forest went silent. No owls, no small animals, nothing but those deep, complex calls. They moved, circled the recording area, always just at the edge of clear reception, always moving, always communicating. My hands were shaking, throat dry. The scientific part of my brain kept working, kept noting details, frequency ranges, pattern structures, movement paths. The human part wanted to run, hide, never listen again. The calls got closer, the movement patterns tightened, circling closer to my position, still just at the edge of clear recording, still impossibly complex, still showing clear intelligence, clear purpose. Something broke nearby. A branch. Heavy. The sound wasn't natural, wasn't random. The break was controlled, deliberate, testing. A response came from another direction, another controlled break. The calls continued, changed pattern, more complex. I could smell them now. Sharp, musky, not decay, not anything I'd smelled in 15 years of field research. The odor was thick, made my eyes water, made my head spin. The calls kept coming, closer now, different patterns, different purpose, movement in the trees, 20 feet up. No moonlight, but I could see shapes, massive shapes, moving with impossible grace, branch to branch. No sound except those deliberate breaks, those complex calls, testing, always testing. The equipment was useless now, the analyzers dead, the recorders still running but struggling. The frequencies were wrong, the patterns impossible. Everything we knew about animal communication said these sounds couldn't exist. Dark shapes moved through the canopy. Fast, silent except for those calls. those deliberate branch breaks. The movement was coordinated, purposeful. The calls showed clear interaction, clear responses, clear intelligence. I sat in my tent, hands shaking, mind racing. 15 years of research experience said, run, run fast, run far. Scientific training said, stay, record, document. The shapes moved closer. The calls got more complex. The smell got stronger. A shadow passed over my tent, huge, 20 feet up, moving smooth, controlled. Another answered from behind. The calls changed again. New patterns, new complexity. The recorders caught everything, kept running even when everything else failed. The demonstration lasted 3 hours. Constant movement, constant communication, constant testing. They never showed themselves clearly, never moved into open space. But they wanted me to record, wanted me to document, wanted me to know. Dawn came slowly. The calls faded. The movement stopped. The smell lingered. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The recorders had filled their memory cards. Hours of impossible sounds, impossible communication, impossible intelligence. I packed up mechanical. Years of field procedure taking over. Everything documented, everything labeled, everything secured. The forest stayed silent. The smell stayed thick. My hands kept shaking. The drive back was a blur. The lab analysis took weeks. The recordings showed things that couldn't exist. Language patterns in impossible frequencies, communication complexity beyond known species, intelligence in the forest canopy. I've analyzed those recordings hundreds of times, run every test, every analysis. The data doesn't lie, doesn't imagine, doesn't make mistakes. What I recorded that night exists. The question is, what was it? The frequency patterns match no known species. The communication complexity suggests intelligence beyond known primates. The movement patterns indicate social coordination. The deliberate demonstration shows awareness, purpose. I've been back to those woods. Different locations, different equipment. The calls come sometimes, always distant, always just at the edge of recording range, always showing that impossible complexity, that impossible intelligence. The original recordings stay secure, copied, backed up, protected, but not published, not shared. Some discoveries aren't ours to make. Some intelligence deserves its privacy, its mystery. I still do field research, still record forest sounds, but I work differently now, listen differently. When the forest goes quiet, when the smell hits, when the calls start, I pack up, move out, leave them their songs, their privacy, their forest. The scientific community wants proof, wants analysis, wants explanation. The proof exists, the analysis is done, but the explanation, some things should stay mysterious. Some intelligence deserves its secrets. I've changed my research focus, study different patterns now, different species. But sometimes, on quiet nights in deep woods, I hear those calls again, that impossible complexity, that ancient intelligence, and I turn off my equipment, pack up my gear, leave them their songs. The recordings exist, the proof is there, but some things aren't meant for papers, for conferences, for peer review. Some songs belong to the forest, to the night, to them. I still listen though, still record, still study, but with different purpose now, different understanding. And when the forest goes quiet, when the smell hits, when the calls begin, I listen with respect, with humility, with acceptance that some songs aren't meant for our ears. Some intelligence isn't meant for our understanding. That's what the forest taught me that night. That's what the recordings prove. That's what keeps my hands shaking even now, years later, when I hear those impossible calls in the distance. Some songs belong to older things, wiser things, things that choose when to be heard, when to be known, when to stay silent. I am Dr. Amélie Dubois, botanical researcher specializing in Pacific Northwest flora. I've spent 15 years studying plant life in Washington state. On July 15, 2023, during a routine sample collection, I encountered something that challenged everything I know about this ecosystem. This is my complete account, documented 24 hours after the incident. The day started at 6 a.m. Weather conditions were optimal. Clear skies, temperature 65 degrees Celsius, light breeze from the northwest. I packed my standard field equipment, collection bags, specimen containers, GPS unit, cameras, and soil testing kit. My research site was in a remote area of the Olympic National Forest, elevation 3,200 feet. The location was 3 miles from the nearest logging road. I'd been studying unusual growth patterns in the understory vegetation for 6 months. I reached the site at 8:15 a.m. The first anomaly appeared immediately, a section of young Douglas firs, all bent at unnatural angles, not wind damage, not snow damage. The trees were systematically bent, all at the same height, all pointing the same direction. I started documenting, took soil samples, measured trunk diameters, photographed the bend patterns. The trees were healthy, no disease, no insect damage, just bent, deliberately bent. At 9:30 a.m., I found the first footprint. Not human, not bear, not elk. The print measured 16 inches long, 8 inches wide. Clear toe impressions, 5 toes, almost human-like, but massive. I photographed the print, placed a ruler next to it for scale, made a plaster cast. Standard research protocol. The ground was soft. The print was fresh, less than 24 hours old. More prints appeared. A clear trail, 6-foot stride length, bipedal gait. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward an area of dense undergrowth. I followed the tracks, documented each one, took measurements, made notes. The pattern was consistent. Whatever made these prints walked on 2 legs, walked with purpose, walked with intelligence. At 10:45 a.m., the vegetation changed. The understory plants were pressed down, flattened in a circular pattern, 30 feet in diameter, like something had been sleeping there. Recently. The smell hit me first. Strong, musky, not bear, not elk, not anything I'd encountered in 15 years of field research. The odor grew stronger as I approached the flattened area. I took soil samples from the circle. The ground was warm, body heat warm. Something large had been there. Very recently. Movement caught my attention. A branch snapped, high up, too high for a person to reach. I looked up, saw more bent trees, bigger trees, bent and woven together, forming structures. These weren't natural formations. The weaving was deliberate, complex, intelligent. I started photographing, documenting, measuring. The structures were 15 feet off the ground, some higher. At 11:30 a.m., I heard the first vocalization. Not bird, not mammal, not anything in my experience. A deep, resonant sound. It vibrated in my chest, made my teeth rattle. I activated my audio recorder, standard field equipment. The sound came again, closer. Then another answered, from a different direction. They called back and forth, complex vocalizations, patterns, communication. The smell grew stronger. My eyes watered, my throat tightened. Movement in the trees, breaking branches, heavy footsteps, coming closer. I kept recording, kept documenting. Science demanded evidence, data. But my hands shook. Sweat ran down my back despite the cool air. Something large moved through the forest. The footsteps grew louder. The ground vibrated with each impact. Not one set of footsteps, multiple, coordinated, hunting. I saw the first one at 11:45 a.m. through the trees, 9 feet tall at least. Massive shoulders, long arms, covered in dark fur. Not bear, not any known species. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. I raised my camera, hands shaking. The creature turned, looked directly at me. The eyes, intelligent eyes, aware eyes. It knew I was there, had known all along. Another one appeared, larger, moving through the trees to my left. A third to my right. They were coordinating, surrounding me. The vocalizations continued, complex patterns. They were communicating, planning. I had to move, had to run. But they had positioned themselves perfectly, every escape route blocked. The smell was overwhelming now, the footsteps closer. The ground shook with their movement. At 11:52 a.m., I made a decision. I dropped my sample bags, kept the cameras, the audio recorder. The evidence mattered. I ran. Straight ahead, through the narrowest gap in their formation. They moved instantly, fast, impossibly fast for their size. The forest erupted with sound, breaking branches, heavy impacts, those deep, resonant calls. I ran harder. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I heard them behind me, getting closer. The smell grew stronger, the footsteps louder, the vocalizations more excited. Trees whipped past, branches cut my face. I lost my GPS unit. Didn't matter. Had to keep running, had to reach the logging road. My car was there, a mile away, too far. They herded me. I realize that now. Every time I tried to turn, one would appear, force me back on course. They were directing my flight, controlling it. The logging road appeared ahead. I saw my car, fumbled with the keys. The creatures were right behind me. I could feel their breath, smell their presence, hear their breathing. I reached the car, got inside, locked the doors, started the engine. Only then did I look back. They stood at the forest edge, 3 of them, enormous, 9 feet tall at least, maybe taller. Their fur dark and thick, their eyes, those intelligent eyes, fixed on me. We stared at each other, 30 seconds, a minute. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched, studied, remembered. Then they turned, stepped back into the forest, their movements synchronized, deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I drove straight to the research station, reported everything, showed them the photos, the plaster casts, played the audio recordings. The photos were blurry, always blurry, but the footprints remained, the bent trees remained, the audio recordings remained. Evidence, data, facts. The official report says, unidentified large mammals exhibiting unusual behavior. That's what academic protocol requires. That's what I had to write. But we know what we documented, what we found, what lives in those forests. I still conduct research, still collect samples, but never alone now, never in that area, and always watching the trees, listening for those sounds, testing the air. This is my account, every detail accurate, every measurement verified, every observation documented. The evidence exists, the data exists, interpret it as you will. But if you're in those woods and you find trees bent in impossible ways and you smell that strange musky odor, don't investigate, don't collect samples, don't try to document. Leave immediately, leave quietly, because sometimes scientific curiosity is dangerous, and sometimes they're studying us too. End of official account. Dr. Amélie Dubois, botanical researcher, July 16, 2023. It was supposed to be a simple climb. No frills, no records, just me in the mountains of Hokkaido. I had planned this hike for months, mapped every possible route, read all the weather reports. I wanted peace. No more busy streets of Tokyo, no more noise. Just me, alone, surrounded by nature. I started early, at dawn. The air was cold, biting, and I could see my breath each time I exhaled. The mountain trail stretched ahead, twisting through the forest. The first hour was uneventful, the crunch of my boots against dirt and the occasional call of a bird my only company. I took my time, enjoying the fresh air, the quietness that was so different from the city. The trees were dense, branches twisting overhead and blocking most of the sunlight. I moved steadily, my pack heavy on my back, but the weight was comforting. There was something about the isolation that made everything feel sharper. The smell of pine needles, the chill on my skin, the sound of the wind rushing through the branches. It wasn't until around noon that things began to feel different. I had reached a spot where the trail started to ascend more steeply, winding up a rocky section. I paused, took a drink from my water bottle, and looked around. The forest was quieter now. It wasn't something I noticed all at once. It was gradual. 1 minute, there were birds and rustling leaves, and the next, silence. I shrugged it off at first. The wind died down, and maybe that explained the stillness. I took another sip, packed the bottle away, and kept climbing. But as I moved, a feeling began to settle in my gut, a kind of unease that I couldn't shake. I stopped again, listened carefully. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. I took a breath and tried to calm myself. I kept moving, my boots crunching over loose stones and dirt, each step louder than it should have been. The higher I went, the thicker the fog got. It wasn't unusual for fog to roll in, especially at this elevation, but it seemed thicker than normal. The trees disappeared into the mist, their trunks like shadows. The path ahead was barely visible, and I had to slow down, watch every step. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like eyes boring into me. I stopped again, my eyes darting around, my ears straining. But there was nothing, just the fog and the shadows of trees. My heart thumped faster, and I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, just the fog playing tricks. I took a few more steps and heard something, a crack, like a branch snapping under weight. My whole body stiffened and I turned quickly, my eyes searching the mist. The sound had come from behind me, somewhere down the path. I held my breath, listening. Nothing moved. I took another step back, keeping my eyes on the direction the sound had come from. My breathing was shallow now, every instinct telling me something was wrong. Another crack echoed through the trees, louder this time, closer. My hands felt cold despite the sweat on my palms. I gripped my walking stick tightly, my eyes darting back and forth. And then I saw it. Just for a second, a figure moving between the trees. It was big, taller than any person I'd ever seen, its shape barely visible in the fog. It moved quickly, disappearing behind a tree before I could get a proper look. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a wave of panic rise up. I wasn't alone. My brain kicked into gear. Should I shout? Make my presence known? No, that didn't feel right. I turned, decided to keep moving, faster this time. I didn't run, not yet, but my pace picked up, my boots scuffing against the stones as I climbed higher. The fog was thickening, swallowing everything around me. My heart pounded with each step. Another noise. This time it wasn't a crack, but a low sound, almost like a grunt, deep, resonant, the kind of sound that sent shivers down my spine. I stopped again, my body frozen, my ears straining. The grunt came again, closer now, somewhere off to my left. I turned my head, squinting into the fog, and saw movement, a dark shape, shifting between the trees. It wasn't human. It was too broad, too tall. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I turned, started moving again, faster this time, almost jogging. I could hear my own breathing now, harsh and quick, the fog making it hard to see anything more than a few feet ahead. My mind raced. What was it? A bear? No, bears didn't walk like that. It was upright, and bears didn't follow people like this, silently moving through the mist. I had heard stories, of course, legends of creatures that lived deep in the mountains, things that people claimed to see. I'd always brushed them off as superstition, stories told by those who spent too much time alone in the woods. But now, with each step I took, With each noise that came from behind me, those stories didn't feel so far-fetched. My legs ached as I kept moving, my pace as fast as I could manage without losing my footing. The trail was narrow, winding its way up the mountain, and the fog made every step feel uncertain. I glanced over my shoulder, the world behind me, nothing but white mist. And then, through the fog, I heard it. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, moving steadily towards me. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear like metal in my mouth. I picked up my pace, my legs burning, my lungs aching with each breath. My mind screamed at me to run, but I knew that if I tripped, if I fell, whatever was behind me would be on me in seconds. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead, the fog pressing in from all sides. The footsteps were closer now, louder. I didn't dare look back. My entire focus was on putting one foot in front of the other, on moving forward, on getting away. My pack felt heavy, too heavy, the straps digging into my shoulders. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, the adrenaline pumping through me like fire. And then the trail dipped, a slight downhill stretch. I took the opportunity, my steps turning into a run, my feet slipping slightly on the loose stones. The fog blurred everything, the trees little more than dark shapes rushing past. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, steady, relentless. They weren't running, just walking, but each step sounded closer, heavier. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I went down hard, my knees hitting the dirt. Pain shot up my leg, and I bit back a cry, pushing myself up, my hands scraping against the stones. I could feel tears in my eyes, a mix of pain and fear, but I didn't stop. I forced myself back to my feet, started moving again, my body screaming in protest. The trail opened up slightly, the trees thinning out, and I could see a small clearing ahead. I ran towards it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my body aching. I reached the clearing, my eyes scanning for somewhere to hide, somewhere to go. There was a large boulder to one side, its surface slick with moss, and I made for it, dropping down behind it, trying to catch my breath, trying to think. The footsteps were still there, moving steadily, the crunch of leaves and twigs getting louder. I pressed myself against the boulder, my body trembling, my hands shaking. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, my breath too loud. I shut my eyes, listening, praying that whatever it was would just pass by, that it wouldn't see me. The footsteps entered the clearing, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. I could hear it now, the low sound of breathing, a deep, rhythmic inhale and exhale. It was close, so close I could feel the vibration of each step through the ground. My fingers dug into the dirt, and I kept my eyes shut, my entire focus on staying still, staying quiet. And then it stopped. The footsteps halted, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick, heavy, and I could feel the presence of whatever it was, just beyond the boulder. A low grunt echoed through the clearing, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. I opened my eyes, just a crack, and slowly turned my head, peeking around the edge of the boulder. And there it was, tall, broad, covered in dark fur. Its back was to me, its head turning slowly, scanning the clearing. It was massive, larger than any man, its shoulders broad, its arms long. I could see the muscles moving beneath the fur, the sheer power of the thing. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. I stayed still, watching, my body trembling. The creature made another low noise, almost like a sigh, and then it turned, moving towards the edge of the clearing, back into the fog. I watched as it disappeared, its shape swallowed by the mist, the sound of its footsteps fading away. I didn't move for a long time. I stayed there, pressed against the boulder, my body shaking, my mind racing. The fog was still thick, the forest still quiet, but the creature was gone. I let out a slow breath, my hands relaxing slightly, the tension in my body easing just a fraction. I knew I couldn't stay here. I needed to move, to get off this mountain. Slowly, carefully, I got to my feet, my legs shaky, my knees aching. I glanced around, the clearing empty, the fog pressing in from all sides. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and then I started moving, heading back the way I had come. My pace was slow, cautious, my ears straining for any sound, my eyes scanning the fog. The trail was narrow, winding, and I kept my steps light, trying not to make noise. My heart was still pounding, my body still tense, every nerve on edge. The way down felt longer, each step taking me further from the clearing, from the place where I had seen it. I kept moving, kept my focus on the trail, on putting one foot in front of the other. The fog began to thin as I descended, the trees becoming clearer, the sunlight filtering through the branches. Finally, I saw it, the outline of the trailhead, the parking lot beyond, the glint of my car in the distance. Relief flooded through me, and I felt my knees go weak, my body almost sagging with exhaustion. I picked up my pace, my eyes locked on the car, the thought of safety driving me forward. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me several tries to unlock the door. I threw my pack in the back, climbed in, and slammed the door shut, locking it. I sat there for a moment, my hands on the wheel, my breath coming in gasps, my heart still pounding. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and I pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure stepping out of the trees. But there was nothing, just the empty trailhead and the fog rolling down the mountain. I didn't stop driving until I was far away, until the forest was nothing but a distant memory. My body ached, my mind was numb, but I was alive. I didn't know what I had seen, and maybe I never would. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't be coming back to these mountains, not alone, not ever. The cave shouldn't have been occupied. That was my first thought when I saw the signs. I'm a geologist. 20 years of cave exploration and mapping. I know what empty caves look like, what abandoned caves look like. This one wasn't empty, wasn't abandoned. Something lived here, something big. I was mapping formations in the Cascade Range, standard geological survey. The cave entrance was unremarkable, normal limestone formation. Nothing special in my initial readings, just another data point on my survey map. I was wrong. The entrance was narrow, 10 feet high, 4 feet wide, typical karst formation. I had my standard gear, helmet, lights, survey equipment, sampling tools. 20 years of experience said this was routine, nothing unusual. The first warning was the smell, sharp, musky, not bat guano, not mineral, not anything I'd encountered in thousands of cave surveys. It hit me 15 feet in, made my eyes water, made my throat tight, made my nose burn. The floor showed the second warning. Tracks in the soft cave mud, big tracks, 18 inches long at least, bipedal, clear dermal ridges, like human prints but wrong, too big, too deep, too fresh. I took measurements. Standard procedure. The stride length was impossible, 8 feet between prints, perfect balance line, no drag marks. Whatever made them walked upright, walked with purpose, walked recently. The cave opened into a larger chamber, 30 feet high, 50 feet wide. My lights didn't reach the back. The smell was stronger here. The floor showed more tracks, hundreds of them, different sizes, different ages, all the same impossible shape. Then I saw the nests. That's what they were. Had to be. Constructed platforms of broken branches, woven together, deliberate, intelligent. The smallest was 8 feet across, the largest 12, all raised off the cave floor, all showing recent use. The branches weren't random. Each piece was broken to length, fitted together. The weaving showed pattern, purpose, Intelligence. These weren't animal nests. These were constructed shelters, built with thought, with skill. I checked the branches, clean breaks, not weather damage, not rot, broken by force, tremendous force. 8-inch branches snapped like twigs, but precisely, deliberately. Each break calculated, measured. The nests had padding, layers of vegetation, fresh vegetation, deliberately gathered, systematically arranged, some still green, still fresh, recently placed, recently used. My hands started shaking. 20 years of cave experience meant nothing here. This was new, different, wrong. The evidence was clear. The occupation was current. The residents were close, were coming back. I took samples, standard procedure fighting with survival instinct. Hair samples from the nests. Dark, coarse, long, not bare, not human, not anything in my experience. Vegetation samples, branch samples, soil samples, everything documented, everything bagged. The deeper chamber told more stories. Bones, hundreds of them, not scattered, not random, stacked, sorted. Large prey bones separated from small, fresh kills separated from old. Systematic, organized, intelligent. The bones showed tool marks, not knife cuts, not stone tools. Marks from something strong enough to break elk femurs clean, but the breaks were precise, deliberate. The marrow extracted with skill, with purpose, with intelligence. Movement echoed from the entrance, deep sounds, like speech but not speech, complex tones, multiple sources. My light caught shadows on the wall, large shadows, 8 feet tall at least, moving with purpose, coming closer. Training said stay, document, observe. Survival instinct said run, hide, never return. The shadows got larger, the sounds more complex, the smells stronger. My legs chose survival. I moved deeper into the cave. A side passage offered escape, narrow, tight. My light showed it opened into another system. Behind me, the sounds continued. Closer now. Clear communication, clear purpose, clear intelligence. I squeezed through the passage, heart pounding, hands shaking. The sounds followed, the smells followed, but the passage was too narrow for them, too tight for their size. My size advantage, my only advantage. The new passage led up, toward the surface. I climbed fast. 20 years of cave experience guiding my hands, my feet. The sounds echoed below, complex tones, different voices, different pitches, all showing that impossible intelligence. I found the surface exit, small opening, tight squeeze. The evening light never looked so good. I emerged into mountain forest. The sounds still echoed from below, still showed that complex communication, still carried that clear intelligence. The hike back to my truck took an hour, should have taken 20 minutes. I kept looking back, kept listening. The samples felt heavy in my pack. The evidence burned in my mind. Everything I knew about cave habitation, about primate behavior, about intelligence was wrong. The lab analysis took weeks. Every sample told the same story. The hair was primate but unknown species. The tool marks showed precision but impossible strength. The construction materials showed intelligence but unknown technique. I filed my report, submitted my evidence, changed my research focus, moved to different mountains, different caves. But I can't forget what I found, what I heard, what I smelled, what I escaped. The cave system is marked on my maps, not as empty, not as abandoned, marked as occupied, currently occupied, continuously occupied. The evidence dates back centuries, millennia, the same species, the same intelligence, the same purpose. Other geologists ask about that cave, about my report, about my samples. I show them the evidence, show them the analysis, show them the maps, let them make their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing, when they're deep in a cave and smell that sharp, musky odor, when they see those impossible tracks, when they hear those complex sounds, get out, immediately. Some caves aren't abandoned, some territories aren't unclaimed. I still explore caves, still map formations, still conduct surveys. But I work differently now, watch differently, listen differently. And when I smell that distinctive odor, when I see those deliberate constructions, when I hear those complex sounds, I leave, immediately. No samples, no surveys, no questions. The evidence exists, the samples are preserved, the analysis is documented. But some discoveries aren't for us to make. Some territories aren't for us to claim. Some intelligence deserves its privacy, its space, its home. Those caves belong to them, have belonged to them for thousands of years, will belong to them for thousands more. We're just visitors, just observers, just temporary intruders in their ancient halls. I've changed my research, changed my focus, but sometimes, deep in other caves, I catch that smell, hear those sounds, see those shadows, and I remember what I learned in that occupied cave. Some places aren't abandoned, some residents never left, some intelligence never ended. The samples sit in storage now, the reports filed away, the maps marked with warnings, but the real evidence is in my memory, in my racing heart when I smell that odor, in my shaking hands when I hear those sounds, in my absolute certainty that some caves have always been occupied, always will be occupied, not by us, by them. I still explore, still map, still study, but with different understanding now, different respect. And when the signs appear, when the evidence shows, when the residents make themselves known, I leave, immediately, respectfully, grateful for the warning, grateful for the escape, grateful for the lesson that some caves aren't ours to claim, never were, never will be. My name is Dr. Zhang Wei, Senior Geologist with the California Geological Survey. On August 28, 2023, while conducting a routine geological survey in the Trinity Alps, I encountered something that defied scientific explanation. This is my complete account, documented 48 hours after the incident. The survey began at 7 a.m., standard conditions for late summer, clear skies, temperature 70 degrees, humidity 45%. I carried standard field equipment, geological hammer, sample bags, GPS unit, cameras, and survey tools. The survey area was remote, elevation 4,800 feet, approximately 5 miles from the nearest Forest Service road. I'd been mapping a series of unusual rock formations for 3 weeks. Nothing in the previous surveys had suggested anything unusual about the area. At 8:30 a.m., I noticed the first anomaly, a series of large nests in the trees. Not eagle nests, not osprey nests. These were massive structures, 15 feet in diameter, built 30 feet off the ground. I started documenting. Standard scientific protocol, took photographs, made measurements using laser rangefinder. The nests showed complex construction, branches woven together, reinforced with smaller sticks. The weaving pattern indicated intelligence, planning. The structures weren't old, the vegetation was fresh, green leaves still on the branches, recently built, within the last week. At 9:15 a.m., I found the first evidence of occupation, large branches broken at impossible heights, 20 feet up, 25, some higher. The breaks were clean, deliberate, not storm damage. I collected samples from the broken branches. The wood was fresh, sap still flowing. These breaks were recent, very recent, within the last 24 hours. The smell hit me at 9:45 a.m., strong, musky, not bear, not mountain lion, not anything I'd encountered in 20 years of field work. The odor grew stronger as I approached another nest structure. Below the nest, I found more evidence. Hair samples caught in bark, dark, coarse hair, long strands, not bear fur, not deer, not any known species in the region. I bagged the samples, labeled them, photographed their location, standard collection procedures. But my hands shook slightly. The hair was fresh. Whatever left it was still in the area. At 10:30 a.m., I heard the first sounds. Rhythmic tapping, like wood on wood, but patterned, deliberate, coming from multiple directions. The sounds echoed through the forest. Complex patterns, communication. I activated my audio recorder. The tapping continued. Changed rhythm. Other tapping responded. Different patterns, different locations. They were coordinating, communicating. Movement caught my eye. High in the trees, something large, moving between the branches. Impossible height, impossible size. The branches bent under its weight. I raised my camera, started filming. The shape moved with purpose, with intelligence, not like an animal moving. Different, deliberate. Then I saw another, larger, moving through the canopy to my left, a third to my right. They were positioning themselves, coordinating their movements through the tapping sounds. The smell grew stronger. My eyes watered, my throat tightened, but I kept filming, kept documenting. Science demanded evidence. At 11 a.m., one of them came down. It moved down the trunk, head first, like a human would climb, but far too large, far too fast. 9 feet tall at least, massive shoulders, long arms, covered in dark fur. I held the camera steady. Professional training took over. Document everything. The creature moved with fluid grace. Impossible grace for something that size. It looked directly at me. The eyes. Intelligent eyes. Calculating eyes. It knew I was there. Had known all along. The tapping changed rhythm. Became urgent. Excited. The others responded. They were surrounding me, coordinating through the sounds. I had to move, had to run, but they had positioned themselves perfectly, every escape route blocked. The smell was overwhelming now, the tapping louder, more insistent. At 11:15 a.m., I made my decision, dropped my geological samples, kept the cameras, the audio recorder. The evidence mattered more than rocks. I ran, straight ahead, through the narrowest gap in their formation. They moved instantly, fast, impossibly fast. The forest erupted with sound, breaking branches, heavy impacts. Those rhythmic tappings turned to deep, resonant calls. The pursuit was coordinated. Every time I tried to turn, one would appear, force me back on course. They were herding me, controlling my movement through the forest. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I heard them above me, moving through the trees, getting closer. The smell grew stronger, the sounds louder, the tapping more excited. Branches whipped my face, rocks turned under my feet. I lost my GPS unit. Didn't matter. Had to reach the Forest Service road. My truck was there, 2 miles away, too far. They stayed above me, moving through the canopy. Their weight made branches crack and fall. Their movements synchronized, practiced. They'd done this before. The road appeared ahead. I saw my truck, fumbled with the keys. They were right above me now. I could hear their breathing, smell their presence, feel their weight shifting in the trees. I reached the truck, got inside, locked the doors, started the engine. Only then did I look up. They hung in the trees, 3 of them, enormous, their fur dark and thick. Those intelligent eyes fixed on me, studying, calculating, remembering. We stared at each other. 2 minutes, 3. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Then they moved, climbed higher, disappeared into the canopy, their movements fluid, graceful, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I drove straight to the survey office, reported everything, showed them the videos, the hair samples, played the audio recordings. The footage was blurry, always blurry, but the hair samples remained, the broken branches remained, the audio recordings remained. Evidence, data, facts. The official report says, unidentified arboreal mammals exhibiting complex social behavior. That's what scientific protocol requires. That's what I had to write. But we know what we documented, what we found, what lives in those trees. I still conduct surveys, still collect samples, but never alone now, never in that area, and always watching the canopy, listening for those tapping sounds, testing the air. This is my account. Every detail accurate, every measurement verified, every observation documented. The evidence exists, the data exists. Analyze it as you will. But if you're in those woods and you hear rhythmic tapping in the trees and you smell that strange musky odor, don't investigate. Don't collect samples. Don't try to document. Leave immediately. Leave quietly. Because sometimes scientific curiosity has consequences, and sometimes they're watching from above. End of official account. Dr. Zhang Wei, Senior Geologist, California Geological Survey, August 30th, 2023. We wanted a weekend away from the city, something different. The kids were excited about camping, so we packed up and drove out to the Appalachian Mountains. I hadn't camped since I was a kid myself, but it seemed simple enough. A tent, a campfire, a few marshmallows, no technology, no work emails, just us. We arrived in the late afternoon, and the site was perfect. It was a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines that almost closed us off from the world. The sun was just starting to dip, casting long shadows across the ground. My wife Sarah and I set up the tent while our two kids, Jamie and Sophie, ran around, chasing each other and laughing. They were having a blast. Once the tent was up, I got the fire going. I'd forgotten how hard it could be, but after some fumbling, I managed it. The flames crackled to life, and the smell of burning wood filled the clearing. We roasted hot dogs and then marshmallows, the kids sticking their marshmallows too close to the flames and giggling as they caught fire. It felt right, like something we should have done a long time ago. The sun disappeared completely, and the darkness set in. The only light came from our fire, the orange glow dancing across the trees. The air got colder, and I wrapped an arm around Sarah, pulling her close while the kids started to wind down. Jamie leaned against me, yawning, his eyelids heavy. Sophie sat with Sarah, wrapped up in a blanket. "Time for bed," I said, and there were some protests, but not many. They were exhausted from the day, and it didn't take long to get them into the tent. The fire was still burning, though smaller now. I tossed another log on, then zipped up the tent and crawled in. The air mattress squeaked as we settled in, Sarah on one side, the kids between us. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt a bit heavy. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional crack from the dying fire. The kids were out almost instantly, their breaths even and soft. Sarah whispered something about how she loved this, how we should do it more often. I agreed, my eyes already drooping. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up. It was sudden. My eyes opened, and I stared at the dark ceiling of the tent. I wasn't sure what had woken me at first, but then I heard it. A noise from outside. A rustling, like something moving around. I lifted my head slightly, listening. There it was again. Slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. At least it didn't sound like it. My heart started to pound a little faster, my body going tense. I glanced over at Sarah, but she was still asleep, her face half buried in her pillow. I strained to hear, my ears trying to make sense of the sound. It was coming from the edge of the clearing, from the direction where our car was parked. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a raccoon maybe, but there was a rhythm to the steps that didn't feel right. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag, careful not to make too much noise. The sound continued, getting closer. My pulse quickened. I reached over and gently shook Sarah's shoulder. She stirred, blinking at me in confusion. I put a finger to my lips, signaling her to stay quiet. She frowned, but she stayed still, her eyes wide now. I gestured towards the door of the tent, trying to tell her that there was something out there. Her expression changed, her face going pale. She nodded slightly, her eyes darting towards the kids, who were still asleep between us. The noise was louder now, closer. I could hear branches snapping, heavy footsteps moving around the campsite. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps circled the tent, slow, deliberate. I could see the shadow of something moving across the fabric of the tent, something tall. My chest tightened, my breathing shallow. Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers squeezing tight. I squeezed back, my eyes locked on the side of the tent where the shadow had moved. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, my entire body tensed, ready to spring if I needed to. And then the sound stopped, just like that. The footsteps, the rustling, everything. The silence that followed was almost worse. My ears strained, waiting for something, anything. I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that made the hair on my arms stand up. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Nothing moved, no sound. I turned my head slowly, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, her hand still gripping mine. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I mouthed to her, "Stay here." She shook her head, her eyes widening even more. I motioned again, trying to show her I was just going to check, that I wasn't going far. She didn't look happy about it, but she finally nodded. I let go of her hand, slowly unzipped the sleeping bag all the way, and moved towards the tent door. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow, my pulse thundering in my ears. I reached the zipper of the tent, paused, listened. Still nothing. I unzipped it slowly, inch by inch, wincing at every small noise it made. The cold air rushed in, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. I stuck my head out, looking around. The fire had died down to nothing more than glowing embers. The clearing was dark, the trees around us black shapes against the sky. I couldn't see anything, no movement, no shadows. But the feeling was still there, that feeling of something watching. I slipped out of the tent, moving slowly, carefully. I stood up, my eyes scanning the clearing, my ears straining for any sound. I moved towards the fire pit, my feet crunching softly on the dirt and leaves. My hands were trembling, my body tense, ready to bolt if I needed to. I reached the fire pit, picked up the long stick I'd been using to poke the fire earlier. It wasn't much, but it was something. I turned slowly, my eyes moving from tree to tree, looking for any sign of movement. The forest was still, the silence almost deafening. Then I heard it. A sound from the edge of the clearing, near where the car was parked. A low noise, almost like a grunt. My grip tightened on the stick, my breath catching in my throat. I turned towards the sound, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. There, between the trees, I saw it. A shape, tall, broad, moving slowly. It was too dark to make out details, but it was big, bigger than any person. My heart skipped a beat, my mouth going dry. The figure moved, disappearing behind a tree, then reappearing on the other side, its movements slow, almost deliberate. I took a step back, my body screaming at me to run, to get back to the tent, to my family. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I couldn't let it get closer. I turned, moved quickly back to the tent, my breath coming in short gasps. I unzipped the door, slipped inside, and zipped it back up, my hands shaking. Sarah was sitting up now, her eyes wide, fear etched across her face. I shook my head at her, trying to tell her to stay quiet. I moved over to the kids, who were still asleep, oblivious to what was happening. I put a hand on Jamie's shoulder, shook him gently. "Wake up, buddy," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He stirred, his eyes blinking open, confusion on his face. "Daddy," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Shh," I said. "We need to be very quiet, okay? We're going to move to the car." He looked at me, his brow furrowing, but he nodded. I moved over to Sophie, did the same, waking her gently, whispering to her to stay quiet. Sarah was already getting her shoes on, her hands shaking as she tried to lace them up. I could still hear movement outside, slow, heavy footsteps moving around the edge of the clearing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm for the kids. I helped them get their shoes on, then looked at Sarah. "Ready?" I mouthed. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. I unzipped the tent door again, slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The cold air rushed in, and I shivered, whether from the cold or from fear, I wasn't sure. I stepped out, motioned for Sarah and the kids to follow. Jamie held onto my hand, his small fingers gripping tightly. We moved slowly, carefully, staying low. The car was parked at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet away. It felt like miles. My eyes scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. The figure was gone, but I could still feel it, that sense of being watched. We reached the car, and I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my hands trembling. I hit the button to unlock it, the lights flashing briefly. I winced at the brightness, my eyes darting around, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. "Get in," I whispered, opening the door. Sarah climbed in first, then Jamie, then Sophie. I got in last, my eyes still scanning the clearing. I shut the door as quietly as I could, locked it, and let out a shaky breath. I put the key in the ignition, turned it. The engine roared to life, and I winced again, the noise feeling too loud, too intrusive. I put the car in drive, my hands shaking on the wheel, and started to move, slowly at first, then faster as we pulled away from the campsite. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my eyes scanning the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a shape, tall and dark, moving between the trees, but then it was gone, swallowed by the night. I turned my eyes back to the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Nobody spoke. The kids were quiet in the back seat, Sarah's hand resting on Jamie's shoulder, her eyes staring straight ahead. My heart was still pounding, my body tense, every muscle aching. I didn't slow down until we were miles away, until the trees thinned out and the road stretched ahead, empty and clear. I pulled over, my hands still shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked over at Sarah. She looked back at me, her eyes wide, her face pale. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. We both knew we wouldn't be coming back. Not here. Not ever. It's been a few weeks since that night. The kids don't remember much, just that we left early because of something scary. Sarah and I haven't talked about it. Not really. We just know. We avoid the topic, but every now and then I catch her looking at me, and I know she's thinking about it too. About the footsteps, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know. All I know is we got out, and we're never going back. I noticed the bent trees first. 15 years as a hiking guide teaches you to read the forest. Every bent branch, every broken twig tells a story. These trees told a story I'd never seen before. All bent the same way, all at the same height, all forming a path that shouldn't exist. My name is Maeve O'Connor, professional trail guide since 2009. Over 10,000 miles logged in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. I know these forests, know every trail, every animal track, every natural pattern. What I found that day wasn't natural. The morning started routine. Solo reconnaissance of a new trail route. Standard procedure before bringing clients through. Weather was perfect. 50 degrees. Light cloud cover. Good visibility. My German Shepherd, Scout, walked point like always. The first 3 miles showed nothing unusual. Normal forest, normal signs, animal tracks where they should be, vegetation patterns all natural, everything by the book. Then Scout stopped, hackles up, nose working overtime. Something had his attention. The bent trees started 20 yards off trail. Young pines, 4 inches thick, all bent at 8 feet high. Not broken, not damaged. Bent deliberately. The pattern was too perfect for weather, too systematic for accident. Someone, something, had shaped these trees. I've seen bear damage, seen storm damage, seen human vandalism. This was different. The bending showed intelligence, purpose. The trees formed a clear corridor, 10 feet wide, all bent inward, all pointing the same direction, all recently shaped. Scout wouldn't go near them, tail tucked, ears back. He's faced bears, mountain lions, never shown fear like this. The corridor of bent trees stretched into the forest, disappeared into the shadows. The precision was wrong, the purpose was wrong, everything was wrong. The smell hit me next, sharp, musky, made my eyes water, made my throat tight. Not decay, not anything natural. Scout whined, pressed against my legs. 15 years of forest experience, and I'd never smelled anything like it. I took photos, standard procedure, documentation for the trail company, for the Forest Service. The bent trees showed clear patterns, clear purpose, clear intelligence. No human could bend trees this thick. No machine could shape them this precisely. Tracks appeared in the soft ground, big tracks, 18 inches long at least, deeper than bear prints, shaped wrong for any known animal. The stride length was impossible, 8 feet between prints, perfect balance line. Whatever made them walked upright, walked with purpose. I measured everything, took samples, professional habits fighting with instinct. The tracks formed patterns, deliberate movements, regular patrols. The area showed signs of constant use, recent use. The tracks were fresh, hours old at most. Scout's behavior got worse, trembling now. Never seen him like this. He's tracked wolves, faced down bears. This was different. His instincts told him something wrong was here, something dangerous, something intelligent. The bent tree corridor led to a clearing. The patterns there made my hands shake. More bent trees, woven together, forming structures, deliberate structures, like shelters but wrong, too big, too complex, too intelligent in their construction. The shelters showed recent use, fresh vegetation, fresh tracks. The ground was worn in patterns that suggested regular occupation, regular movement, regular purpose, all at a scale too big for humans, too organized for animals. I documented everything, photos, measurements, GPS coordinates, professional training, keeping my hands steady, keeping my mind focused. But every instinct screamed to run, to leave, to never come back. Scout had the right idea. The sound started low, deep, complex tones that didn't match any known animal. Multiple sources, different pitches, like speech but not speech, too structured for animal calls, too complex for random noise. Scout pressed harder against my legs, whined louder. Movement caught my eye, high up, 20 feet at least. The trees shifted, branches moved against the wind. Something massive passed between them, fast, silent, deliberate. The complex sounds continued, changed pattern, changed purpose, more movement, different directions now, coordinated, purposeful. The sounds showed clear communication, clear responses, clear intelligence. Scout started pulling toward the trail. Smart dog, smarter than his human. The smell got stronger. That sharp, musky odor that burned my nose made my eyes water. Multiple sources now, moving with the sounds, with the shadows, with that impossible coordination. that impossible intelligence. I took one last photo, one last measurement. Professional habits dying hard. The shadows moved closer. The sounds got more complex. Scout pulled harder. Finally, survival instinct won. We moved, fast, back toward the trail, toward known territory. The sounds followed, the movement followed, always just out of clear sight, always showing that impossible coordination, that impossible intelligence. Scout kept close, kept pulling, kept whining. His instincts were right. We needed to leave. The hike out took twice as long as it should. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound carried meaning. The complex tones followed us. The sharp smell followed us. The sense of being watched, being evaluated, being understood followed us. I filed my report, submitted my photos, changed my route recommendations. That area is marked now, not for client hikes, not for solo recon, marked as occupied territory, currently occupied, continuously occupied. The evidence suggests long-term habitation, long-term intelligence. Other guides ask about that area, about my report, about my photos. I show them the evidence, show them the GPS coordinates, show them the analysis, let them make their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing. When their dogs act scared, when they smell that sharp musk, when they see those bent trees, leave, immediately. Some territories aren't unclaimed. Some paths aren't meant for us. Some intelligence isn't meant to be understood. I still guide, still explore new trails, still map new routes. But I work differently now, watch differently, listen differently. And when I smell that distinctive odor, when I see those deliberate patterns, when I hear those complex sounds, I leave, immediately. No photos, no measurements, no questions. Scout never forgot, still won't go near that area, still shows fear when we catch that smell, still presses close when we hear those sounds. Dogs know things, understand things, respect things that we sometimes forget to fear. The evidence exists, the photos are filed, the GPS coordinates are marked, but some discoveries aren't for us to make. Some territories aren't for us to map. Some intelligence deserves its privacy, its space, its domain. Those forests belong to them, have belonged to them for thousands of years, will belong to them for thousands more. We're just visitors, just observers, just temporary intruders in their ancient territories. I've changed my routes, changed my procedures, but sometimes, on other trails, in other forests, I catch that smell, hear those sounds, see those shadows, and I remember what I learned that day. Some paths aren't abandoned. Some territories never were empty. Some intelligence never left. The photos sit in files now, the reports stored away, the maps marked with warnings, but the real evidence is in my memory, in Scout's reaction when we catch that scent, in my absolute certainty that some parts of these forests have always been occupied, always will be occupied, not by us, by them. I still guide, still explore, still map trails, but with different understanding now, different respect. And when the signs appear, when the evidence shows, when the residents make themselves known, I leave, immediately, respectfully, grateful for the warning, grateful for the escape, grateful for the lesson that some paths aren't ours to walk, never were, never will be. I'm used to being alone in the woods. It's part of the job, being a wildlife photographer. I don't mind it. I even like it. The isolation lets me focus. I'd driven out to Olympic National Park, one of my favorite places to shoot. It's dense, lush, a mix of quiet and life if you know where to look. I was on assignment, trying to capture some shots of the native wildlife for a magazine piece. It was late afternoon when I started, the sun just dipping behind the tops of the tall pines. I parked my car off the side of a gravel road and hiked in a couple of miles until I found a good spot. A small clearing, surrounded by thick trees, with some decent light coming through. I set up my camera, adjusted the tripod, and waited. Patience is a big part of what I do. Hours can pass with nothing, and then there it is, a perfect shot, a moment no one else sees. The first few hours were uneventful. I got a couple of good shots of birds, some squirrels. Nothing groundbreaking, but it was something. I waited, listening to the sounds around me. The forest was alive, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, the scurrying of small animals in the underbrush. As the sun started to dip lower, the light changed, growing softer, more golden. It's what photographers call the golden hour, and it was perfect for shooting. I scanned the tree line, my camera ready, watching for movement. Then I saw it, a flash of brown fur, moving quickly between the trees. I thought it was a deer, maybe, but something about the way it moved caught my attention. It was fast, low to the ground, gone almost as soon as I noticed it. I adjusted my camera, focused on the spot where I'd seen it. Nothing moved. The forest was quiet now, a little too quiet. The usual background noise of birds and insects had stopped. I frowned, lowering my camera slightly, my eyes scanning the trees. My heart rate picked up just a little, a sense of unease settling in my chest. I told myself it was fine. Sometimes animals sense a predator, and everything goes silent. It wasn't unusual. I took a deep breath, tried to relax, and turned my attention back to my camera. But the feeling stayed, that sense of something just beyond the trees, something I couldn't see. Another hour passed, the light fading more. I knew I'd have to pack it in soon. It wasn't safe to stay out here after dark, especially alone. I started to gather my things, packing away my camera, folding up the tripod. The forest was getting darker, the shadows lengthening, the air cooler. Then I heard it. A snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. My head jerked up, my eyes locking on the tree line. The sound had come from my left, somewhere just beyond the clearing. I stared, my body going still, my ears straining for any other noise. Nothing, just the wind in the trees, the distant rustle of leaves. I swallowed hard, my heart thumping a little faster now. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a deer or even a bear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else, something watching me. I finished packing up quickly, my hands moving faster now, my eyes darting up every few seconds to scan the tree line. Another snap. Closer this time. My body tensed, my breath catching in my throat. I turned slowly, my eyes sweeping the clearing. And then I saw it, a figure, tall, dark, moving between the trees. It was big, bigger than any person I'd ever seen. It was upright, its movements almost too fluid for something that size. My heart skipped a beat, fear flooding my body. I stayed frozen, my eyes locked on the figure. It was moving slowly, its head turning as if it was looking for something. For a moment I thought it looked right at me, and I felt my stomach drop, my whole body going cold. I forced myself to move, my hands shaking as I grabbed my pack, throwing it over my shoulder. I needed to go, now. I turned, trying to stay quiet, moving towards the trail that led back to my car. My breath was shallow, my ears straining for any sound behind me. I could still feel it, that presence, like eyes boring into the back of my head. The trail was narrow, winding through the trees, and the light was fading fast. I moved quickly, my feet crunching on the fallen leaves, every step feeling too loud. My heart pounded, my whole body tense, ready to run if I had to. I kept glancing back, my eyes scanning the shadows, looking for any sign of movement. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, following me. My breath caught, and I picked up my pace, almost jogging now, my hands gripping the straps of my pack. The trail twisted, the trees closing in, the shadows growing thicker. I could barely see where I was going, my flashlight still buried in my pack. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them now, clear, steady, like someone, or something, walking slowly, deliberately, not in any rush. My fear spiked, and I broke into a run, my feet pounding on the dirt trail, my breath coming in gasps. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. Branches whipped at my face, my feet slipping on the uneven ground, but I kept running. The trail was a blur, my only thought to get to the car, to get out of these woods. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on, the footsteps still there, still following. Finally, I saw it. The road, the glint of metal in the fading light. My car. I stumbled out of the trees, my legs shaky, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped them. I could still hear it, the sound of footsteps getting closer, and I felt a surge of panic. I yanked the door open, threw my pack inside, and climbed in, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked the doors, my hands shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I put the car in drive, my foot slamming down on the gas. I didn't look back as I sped down the gravel road, the tires skidding slightly on the loose stones. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The forest blurred past, the darkness swallowing everything behind me. I drove until I was miles away, until the road was smooth and the forest was far behind me. Only then did I let myself breathe, my hands finally relaxing on the wheel. My body was trembling, my mind still racing. The image of that figure burned into my memory. I pulled over on the side of the road, my breath coming in shaky gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing there watching me, but there was nothing, just the empty road, the dark forest in the distance. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know one thing. I'm not going back. Not to those woods. Not alone. In the weeks since, I've tried to forget. Tried to push the memory of that figure out of my mind. But every time I close my eyes, I see it. Tall, dark, moving through the trees. I hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate, following me. I haven't been back to the woods. I don't think I ever will. Not after that. I still do my job, still take photos, but I stick to places where there are people, places where I'm not alone, because whatever was out there, it wasn't something I want to see again. And I have this feeling deep down that it doesn't want to be seen, not by me, not by anyone. My name is Dmitry Volkov. I've been a licensed hunter in Oregon for 25 years. I've tracked every type of game in these forests. But what I found on October 5th, 2023, wasn't the work of any known predator. This is my complete account, written 24 hours after the incident. The morning started at 4:30 a.m. Perfect hunting conditions, clear skies, temperature 38 degrees Celsius, light frost on the ground. I carried my standard gear, Remington 700 rifle, binoculars, hunting knife, emergency supplies. My hunting area was deep in the Mount Hood National Forest, elevation 5,200 feet. The location was 4 miles from the nearest Forest Service road. I'd been hunting this area for 15 years, knew every trail, every clearing, every animal track. At 6:15 a.m., I found the first sign. An elk carcass, adult male, around 700 pounds. But something was wrong. The carcass wasn't randomly torn apart like normal predator kills. I approached carefully. 20 years of hunting experience told me this was different. The elk's remains were organized, methodically arranged, bones sorted by size, organs placed in separate piles. The kill was fresh, blood still wet, steam still rising in the cold air. This happened within the last hour, maybe less. I started documenting, took photos, made notes. Standard hunter's protocol. The precision of the butchering was unsettling. Clean cuts, deliberate cuts, not tooth and claw marks. At 6:45 a.m., I found the tracks. Not bear, not cougar. The prints were huge, 16 inches long, 8 inches wide, clear toe impressions, 5 toes, almost human-like but massive. I photographed the prints, used my knife for scale. The ground was soft from recent rain. The tracks were fresh, very fresh. Whatever made them was still in the area. The prints told a story, multiple individuals, at least 3, maybe more. They moved with purpose, coordinated their movements, surrounded the elk before taking it down. At 7 a.m., the smell hit me, strong, musky, not bear, not cougar, not anything I'd encountered in 25 years of hunting. The odor grew stronger as I continued documenting. More evidence appeared, hair samples caught in tree bark, dark, coarse hair, long strands, not elk, not bear, not any known species in these woods. I collected samples, bagged them, labeled them, but my hands shook slightly. The hair was fresh, still had skin cells attached. Whatever left it was close. At 7:30 a.m., I heard the first sound. A low whistle, deep, resonant, not bird, not mammal, not anything in my experience. The sound carried through the trees, then another answered, from a different direction. I activated my phone's recorder. The whistles continued, changed pitch, complex patterns. They were communicating, coordinating. Movement caught my eye. Something large, moving through the trees. The branches shook under its weight. Too high up for a bear, too deliberate for any known animal. I raised my rifle scope, started scanning. The shape moved with purpose, with intelligence, navigating the branches like it had done this countless times before. Then I saw another, bigger, moving to my left, a third to my right. They were positioning themselves, using the whistles to coordinate their movements. The smell grew overwhelming. My eyes watered, my throat tightened. But I kept watching through the scope, kept documenting on my phone. At 8 a.m., one of them emerged into a clearing, 9 feet tall at least, massive shoulders, long arms, covered in dark fur. It moved with impossible grace for its size. I kept the scope trained on it. Years of hunting steadied my hands. The creature moved methodically, purposefully, checking the area, securing it. It looked directly at me. Through my scope, I saw its eyes, intelligent eyes, calculating eyes. It knew I was there, had known all along. The whistles changed tone, became urgent. The others responded. They were surrounding me, using the sounds to coordinate their positions. I had to move, had to run. But they had positioned themselves perfectly, every escape route blocked. The smell was overpowering now, the whistles louder, more insistent. At 8:15 a.m., I made my choice, slung my rifle, kept my phone recording. The evidence mattered more than the hunt. I ran, straight ahead, through the narrowest gap in their formation. They moved instantly, fast, impossibly fast. The forest erupted with sound, breaking branches, heavy impacts. Those whistles turned to deep, resonant calls. The pursuit was coordinated. Every time I tried to change direction, one would appear, force me back on course. They were herding me, controlling my movement through the forest. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I heard them behind me, getting closer. The smell grew stronger, the sounds louder, the calls more excited. Branches whipped my face. Rocks turned under my boots. I lost my hunting knife. Didn't matter. Had to reach the service road. My truck was there, 2 miles away. Too far. They matched my pace, stayed just behind me. Their footsteps shook the ground. Their breathing grew louder, their calls more frequent. The road appeared ahead. I saw my truck, fumbled with the keys. They were right behind me now. I could feel their breath, smell their presence, hear their movements. I reached the truck, got inside, locked the doors, started the engine. Only then did I look back. They stood at the forest edge, 3 of them, enormous, their fur dark and thick, those intelligent eyes fixed on me, studying, calculating, remembering. We stared at each other. 2 minutes, 3. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Then they turned, stepped back into the forest, their movements synchronized, deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I drove straight to the ranger station, reported everything, showed them the photos, the hair samples, played the audio recordings. The photos were blurry, always blurry, but the elk carcass remained, the footprints remained, the audio recordings remained, evidence, facts, reality. The official report says, unidentified large predators exhibiting unusual hunting behavior. That's what protocol requires. That's what I had to write. But we know what we found, what we documented, what hunts in those woods. I still hunt, still track, but never alone now, never in that area, and always watching the trees, listening for those whistles, testing the air. This is my account. Every detail accurate, every observation verified, every measurement documented. The evidence exists, the facts exist. Judge them as you will. But if you're hunting in those woods and you find kills arranged with unnatural precision and you smell that strange, musky odor, don't investigate, don't document, don't try to track. Leave immediately, leave quietly. Because sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes they let you escape. End of official account. Dmitry Volkov, licensed, hunter, October 6, 2023. I know every sound a river makes at night. 20 years studying salmon spawning patterns teaches you that. The splashes have meaning. The ripples tell stories. But what I heard that night wasn't in any textbook, wasn't in any research paper, wasn't supposed to exist. My name is Sven Johansson, marine biologist, specializing in salmon migration patterns. That night, I was camped along the Hoh River in Washington. Simple research setup, motion sensors, infrared cameras, standard equipment for monitoring nocturnal spawning behavior. The weather was perfect for observation. Clear night, 3/4 moon, temperature around 40 degrees, water level optimal for spawning. Everything by the book, everything normal, until it wasn't. I had my tent set up 50 yards from the river, high enough to avoid flooding, close enough to monitor equipment. The first recording started at midnight, peak activity time for spawning salmon, standard procedure, routine work. The motion sensors triggered at 2:17 a.m., normal for salmon activity. The pattern was wrong though, too regular, too deliberate. The splashes showed purpose, intelligence, not random fish movement, not natural spawning behavior. I checked the monitors. The infrared showed heat signatures in the water. Big signatures. Too big for salmon, too big for any known river species. The movement patterns were wrong too. Coordinated, purposeful, intelligent. The sound came next, not splashing, not water movement. A deep, rhythmic vocalization, complex tones, multiple frequencies, like speech but not speech. Too structured for animal sounds, too complex for random noise. I grabbed my night vision equipment, standard gear for nocturnal observation. The river was active, movement everywhere, but wrong movement. Something was standing in the water, standing upright, 8 feet tall at least. Fishing. The technique was impossible. The figure moved with perfect efficiency, hands faster than sight, snatching salmon from the water, not thrashing, not splashing, smooth, deliberate, professional, better than any human technique I'd ever seen. More figures joined, different sizes, all huge, all moving with that impossible grace, that impossible skill. The fishing pattern showed clear coordination, clear communication, clear intelligence. They worked together, passed fish to each other, sorted them by size. My hands were shaking. 20 years of scientific training said document everything, record everything, observe everything. The survival instinct said, run, hide, never look back. I compromised, kept recording, kept the tent between us. The vocalization patterns increased, complex sounds, different pitches, different tones, clear communication between the figures. They worked in teams, two catching, two sorting, two collecting. Perfect efficiency, perfect coordination. The smell hit me then. Sharp, musky, not fish, not river, not anything I'd encountered in 20 years of field research. It made my eyes water, made my throat tight, made my nose burn. The wind carried it from the river, from them. I checked my equipment. Everything still recording. Motion sensors active, infrared cameras running. The figures ignored the technology, worked around it, showed awareness of camera angles, of sensor ranges, of observation points, intelligent awareness. Their size was impossible, 8 feet tall minimum, massive shoulders, long arms. The moonlight showed dark fur, heavy muscle, but the movement was wrong, too graceful, too controlled, too intelligent for any known primate. They worked for hours, constant motion, constant communication, constant purpose. The pile of caught fish grew, all sorted by size, by species, by condition, scientific precision from creatures that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. The motion sensors caught everything, the cameras recorded everything. 20 years of research experience said this was impossible, but the evidence was there. The data was clear, the intelligence was undeniable. One figure passed close to my position, 15 yards, close enough to see clearly through the night vision. The muscle definition was impossible, the proportions wrong for any known species, the movement too deliberate, too aware, too intelligent. The eyes caught moonlight, deep set, dark, aware, looking right at my position, right at me. I've observed predators before, bears, cougars, mountain lions. These eyes were different, showed intelligence, awareness, understanding. They worked until dawn. Perfect efficiency the whole time. No wasted motion, no wasted energy. The pile of fish grew, all sorted, all organized, all handled with impossible skill, with impossible intelligence. The sunlight showed the full scene. Hundreds of fish, all sorted by species, by size, by condition. The organization was scientific, professional, better than most human fishing operations I'd studied. The ground showed tracks, deep prints, 18 inches long, perfect stride pattern. I documented everything. Professional training taking over, measurements, photographs, sample collections, hair caught on branches, footprints in mud, fish scales showing handling patterns, everything bagged, everything labeled, everything secured. The lab analysis took weeks. Every sample told the same story. Unknown primate species, impossible strength levels, impossible intelligence levels. The fish handling showed technique beyond human capability, beyond known primate capability, beyond known possibility. The recordings showed more. The vocalizations had pattern, structure, language complexity beyond known primate communication. The movement patterns showed social organization, cooperation, intelligence beyond current scientific understanding. I filed my report, submitted my evidence, changed my research location, moved to different rivers, different spawning grounds, but I can't forget what I saw, what I recorded, what I proved existed. Other researchers ask about that night, about my report, about my samples. I show them the evidence, show them the analysis, show them the recordings, let them make their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing. When they're doing night research and hear those complex sounds, when they smell that sharp musk, when they see those impossible movements, pack up, leave, immediately. Some fishing grounds aren't unclaimed, some territories aren't empty, some intelligence isn't meant to be studied. I still research, still study salmon patterns, still conduct night observations. But I work differently now, watch differently, listen differently. And when I hear those specific sounds, when I smell that distinctive odor, when I see those deliberate movements, I leave, immediately. No samples, no recordings, no questions. The evidence exists, the samples are preserved, the recordings are archived, but some discoveries aren't for us to make. Some intelligence isn't for us to understand. Some creatures deserve their privacy, their space, their river. Those fishing grounds belong to them, have belonged to them for thousands of years, will belong to them for thousands more. We're just observers, just visitors, just temporary intruders in their ancient territories. I've changed my research focus, changed my observation patterns, but sometimes, on other rivers, in other locations, I catch that sound, smell that scent, see those movements, and I remember what I learned that night. Some fishing grounds aren't abandoned, some territories never were empty, some intelligence never left. The samples sit in storage now, the reports filed away, the locations marked with warnings. But the real evidence is in my memory, in my racing heart when I hear those sounds, in my shaking hands when I smell that scent, in my absolute certainty that some rivers have always been theirs, always will be theirs. I still study, still research, still observe, but with different understanding now, different respect. And when the signs appear, when the evidence shows, when the residents make themselves known, I leave, immediately, respectfully, grateful for the warning, grateful for the escape, grateful for the lesson that some waters aren't ours to claim, never were, never will be. My name is Isabella Romano. I've been a professional trail guide in the Rocky Mountains for 16 years. I've led hundreds of groups through these mountains. But what my group encountered on August 10th, 2023, defied explanation. This is my complete account, documented 36 hours after the incident. The hike began at 7 a.m., standard summer conditions, clear skies, temperature 65 degrees Fahrenheit, light breeze from the west. I had a group of 6 hikers, all experienced. We carried standard equipment, hiking gear, emergency supplies, GPS units, cameras. Our route followed the Continental Divide Trail, elevation 9,800 feet. The location was 5 miles from the nearest ranger station. I'd guided this trail dozens of times, knew every switchback, every landmark, every potential hazard. At 9:30 a.m., we found the clearing. Something was wrong, immediately wrong. The trees around it weren't fallen naturally, they were uprooted, deliberately uprooted. I signaled the group to stop. 16 years of guiding experience told me this was different. The trees were arranged, methodically stacked, largest on the bottom, smallest on top. Like someone had organized them. The damage was fresh, soil still moist around the roots, leaves still green on the branches. This happened recently, very recently. I started assessing the situation. Standard guide protocol. The clearing was roughly circular, 100 feet in diameter. Every tree within that circle had been pulled up and stacked. Some of these trees were massive, 3 feet in diameter, 40 feet tall. The force required to uproot them was enormous. The precision in stacking them was unsettling. At 10 a.m. the smell hit us, strong, musky, not bear, not elk, not anything I'd encountered in 16 years of mountain guiding. The odor grew stronger as we documented the clearing. Sarah, one of the hikers, found the first prints. Not bear, not human. The impressions were huge, 16 inches long, 8 inches wide, clear toe marks, 5 toes, almost human-like, but massive. I photographed the prints, used my hiking pole for scale. The soil was soft from recent rain, the tracks were fresh, very fresh. Whatever made them was still in the area. More evidence appeared. Hair samples caught in bark, dark, coarse hair, long strands, not bear, not elk, not any known species in these mountains. At 10:30 a.m., We heard the first sound, a deep rumble, like distant thunder, but different. The sound echoed off the mountains. Then another answered, from a different direction. I activated my phone's recorder. The sounds continued, changed pitch, complex patterns. They were communicating, coordinating. The group huddled closer. Mike, another hiker, pointed to movement in the trees, something large, moving through the forest. The branches shook under its weight, too high for a bear, too deliberate for any known animal. I raised my binoculars, started scanning. The shape moved with purpose, with intelligence, not random animal movement. This was calculated, planned. Then we saw another, larger, moving to our left, a third to our right. They were positioning themselves, using the sounds to coordinate their movements. The smell grew overwhelming, eyes watered, throats tightened. But I kept watching, kept the group together, kept documenting. At 11 a.m. one of them emerged, 9 feet tall at least, massive shoulders, long arms, covered in dark fur. It moved with impossible grace for its size. Through the binoculars, I saw its eyes, intelligent eyes, calculating eyes. It looked directly at us. It knew we were there, had known all along. The rumbling sounds changed, became urgent. The others responded. They were surrounding us, using the sounds to coordinate their positions. We had to move, had to run. But they had positioned themselves perfectly. Every escape route blocked. The smell was overpowering now. The sounds louder, more insistent. At 11:15 a.m. I made my decision. Group together, move fast, follow me exactly, now. We ran, straight ahead, through the narrowest gap in their formation. They moved instantly, fast, impossibly fast. The forest erupted with sound, breaking branches, heavy impacts. Those rumbles turned to deep, resonant roars. The pursuit was coordinated. Every time we tried to change direction, one would appear, force us back on course. They were herding us, controlling our movement through the forest. Lungs burned, legs trembled, but we heard them behind us, getting closer, the smells stronger, the sounds louder, the roars more excited. Branches whipped faces, rocks turned under boots. We lost equipment, didn't matter, had to reach the ranger station, 2 miles away, too far. They matched our pace, stayed just behind us. Their footsteps shook the ground, their breathing grew louder, their calls more frequent. The station appeared ahead. We saw the building, fumbled with the door. They were right behind us now. We could feel their breath, smell their presence, hear their movements. We reached the station, got inside, locked the doors. Only then did we look back. They stood at the forest edge. 3 of them, enormous, their fur dark and thick, those intelligent eyes fixed on us, studying, calculating, remembering. We stared at each other. 2 minutes, 3. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Then they turned, stepped back into the forest, their movements synchronized, deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. The rangers responded immediately, documented everything, photographed the clearing, collected hair samples, recorded our statements. The photos were blurry, always blurry, but the clearing remained, the footprints remained, the audio recordings remained, evidence, facts, reality. The official report says, unidentified large mammals exhibiting unusual territorial behavior. That's what protocol requires, that's what I had to write. But we know what we saw, what we documented, what lives in these mountains. I still guide, still lead groups, but never on that trail now, never in that area, and always watching the trees, listening for those sounds, testing the air. This is my account, every detail accurate, every observation verified, every measurement documented. The evidence exists, the facts exist, interpret them as you will. But if you're hiking in these mountains and you find trees stacked with unnatural precision and you smell that strange musky odor, don't investigate, don't document, Don't try to understand. Leave immediately. Leave quietly. Because sometimes curiosity has consequences, and sometimes they're watching us watch them. End of official account. Isabella Romano, Professional Trail Guide, Rocky Mountain National Park, August 12, 2023. Plants don't lie. That's the first rule of botanical research. Growth patterns tell true stories. 15 years studying rare plant species taught me that. But what I found that day in the Olympic Mountains defied every pattern I knew, every rule I'd learned, every scientific certainty I had. My name is Zara Patel, botanist, PhD in alpine plant species. That day I was cataloguing rare lichens in a remote valley. Standard research, simple equipment, sample bags, documentation gear, GPS unit, nothing special. Nothing prepared me for what I discovered. The location was perfect. North-facing slope, 4,000 feet elevation, optimal conditions for the species I studied. I'd been there 3 days, set up a small research camp, everything by the book, everything normal, until it wasn't. The first sign was the vegetation pattern, wrong for natural growth, wrong for human intervention. The plants were bent, woven, not randomly, not accidentally, with purpose, with intelligence, with impossible precision. I started documentation, professional habits kicking in. The pattern covered 20 square meters, young saplings bent in perfect arcs, tall grasses woven between them, everything green, everything alive, everything growing exactly as placed, as designed. The structure was obvious once I stepped back. A shelter, but wrong. Too big for human construction, too complex for animal building. The engineering was impossible. Perfect load distribution, perfect water drainage, perfect air circulation, all created without tools, without damage to the living plants. Inside was worse. The floor was lined with soft vegetation, all carefully selected, all deliberately placed. Medicinal plants grouped together, edible plants separated by type. The organization showed botanical knowledge, shows scientific understanding, showed impossible intelligence. The construction was recent, plants still settling into new positions, soil still fresh around bent stems. But the technique was old. The pattern matched older structures nearby. Same design, same intelligence, same impossible skill, generation after generation of knowledge. I took samples. Measured everything, documented every detail, professional training fighting with growing unease. The evidence made no sense. No known species could build this. No known intelligence could design this. But it existed. The smell hit me first. Sharp, musky, not vegetation, not soil, not anything in my botanical experience. It made my eyes water, made my throat tight, made my nose burn. Fresh, close, getting stronger. Movement caught my eye, 20 feet up. The canopy shifted. Something massive moved through the trees, fast, silent. The branches hardly moved. Perfect balance, perfect control, perfect intelligence in every motion. More movement, different directions. The smell got stronger, multiple sources now. The forest went silent. No birds, no small animals, nothing but the sound of my own breathing, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. A shadow passed over the shelter, huge, 8 feet tall at least, moving with impossible grace. The vegetation barely moved under its weight, under its touch. The darkness showed massive shoulders, long arms, impossible proportions moving with impossible skill. They were changing the shelter, adding new layers, weaving new plants. The skill was incredible, impossible. No tools, no damage, just pure strength and pure precision. Pure intelligence shaping living plants into perfect forms. I documented everything, hands shaking but camera steady. The modifications showed clear purpose, clear planning, clear understanding of botanical principles, of engineering concepts, of architectural design, all done by creatures that shouldn't exist. The work continued for hours. Multiple individuals, different sizes, all showing that impossible skill, that impossible intelligence. They ignored me completely, focused entirely on their work, on their creation, on their impossible shelter. The communication was constant, deep sounds, complex tones, different pitches, like language but not language, too structured for animal calls, too complex for known primate communication. The patterns showed clear meaning, clear purpose, clear intelligence. I kept recording, kept documenting, professional training the only thing keeping me functioning. The creatures moved around me, through their shelter, always just at the edge of clear sight, always showing that impossible grace, that impossible awareness. Their hands were huge, powerful, but the touch was perfect, gentle, precise. Each plant handled with exact pressure, each stem bent with exact force. Perfect botanical knowledge in creatures that science said couldn't exist. The shelter grew, changed, evolved, new layers, new rooms, new purposes, all created with living plants, all growing exactly as placed, all thriving under impossible cultivation, under impossible intelligence. They worked until dusk. Perfect efficiency the whole time, no wasted motion, no wasted energy. The shelter doubled in size, all green, all alive, all growing exactly as designed, exactly as intended by minds that shouldn't exist. I stayed until full dark, kept recording, kept documenting. The creatures vanished as silently as they appeared, back into their forest, into their territory, leaving only their impossible creation, their impossible evidence. The analysis took months, every sample, every measurement, every recording, all showing the same impossible truth. Unknown species, unknown intelligence, unknown civilization living in our forests, building with our plants, showing impossible knowledge of our science. The shelter changed daily, new additions, new modifications, new improvements, all showing that same impossible skill, that same impossible intelligence. The plants thrived, grew exactly as placed, exactly as designed by minds we couldn't understand. I filed reports, submitted evidence, changed research sites, moved to different mountains, different valleys, but I can't forget what I saw, what I documented, what I proved existed, what I proved had always existed. Other botanists ask about that site, about my reports, about my evidence. I show them the samples, show them the photos, show them the analysis, let them make their own conclusions. But I tell them one thing, one important thing, when they're doing field research and smell that sharp musk, when they see plants woven with impossible skill, when they hear those complex sounds, leave, immediately. Some territories aren't unclaimed. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. Some intelligence isn't ours to understand. I still research, still study plants, still do field work, but I work differently now, watch differently, listen differently, and when I catch that scent, when I see those patterns, when I hear those sounds, I leave, immediately. No samples, no photos, no questions. The evidence exists, the samples are preserved, the documentation is filed. But some discoveries aren't for us to make. Some knowledge isn't for us to have. Some intelligence deserves its privacy, its space, its forest. Those mountains belong to them, have belonged to them for thousands of years, will belong to them for thousands more. We're just visitors, just observers, just temporary intruders in their ancient territory. I've changed my research focus, changed my study sites. But sometimes, in other valleys, on other slopes, I catch that smell, see those patterns, hear those sounds, and I remember what I learned that day. Some territories aren't empty. Some knowledge never was lost. Some intelligence never left. The samples sit in storage, the reports filed away, the locations marked as restricted. But the real evidence is in my memory, in my racing heart when I smell that scent, in my shaking hands when I see those patterns, in my absolute certainty that some mountains have always been theirs, always will be theirs. I still study, still research, still explore, but with different understanding now, different respect. And when the signs appear, when the evidence shows, when the residents make themselves known, I leave, immediately, respectfully, grateful for the warning, grateful for the escape, grateful for the lesson that some knowledge isn't ours to claim, never was, never will be. My name is Dr. Magnus Lindstrom. I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in large mammal behavior. I've spent 20 years studying animal movements in Montana's wilderness. But what my cameras captured on September 20th, 2023, defied scientific explanation. This is my complete account, documented 48 hours after the incident. The project began at 2 South p.m. Standard autumn conditions, overcast skies, temperature 55 degrees, light drizzle. I carried my usual equipment, motion-activated cameras, infrared sensors, GPS units, and measurement tools. The study site was in the Bitterroot Mountains, elevation 6,800 feet. The location was 6 miles from the nearest access road. I'd been monitoring wildlife movements in this area for 3 months. Nothing in the previous data suggested anything unusual. I set up 12 cameras in a grid pattern, each camera equipped with night vision, motion sensors, and satellite uplink. Standard research configuration. The cameras covered a quarter-mile square area where we detected unusual animal movement patterns. At 4:30 p.m., I finished the installation. Each camera tested positive, motion sensors calibrated, data feeds confirmed, everything worked perfectly. I retreated to my observation blind 50 yards from the nearest camera. The first anomaly appeared at 8:45 p.m. Camera 7 detected movement, large movement. The infrared signature was massive, too big for elk, too big for bear. The heat pattern was wrong for any known species. I checked the live feed. The shape moved through frame, bipedal, upright. The height calculation based on reference markers showed over 8 feet, maybe taller. At 9 p.m., 3 more cameras triggered simultaneously. The movement pattern was coordinated, strategic. The shapes were circling the grid, testing the perimeter. I started recording everything, standard research protocol. The shapes moved with purpose, with intelligence, not random animal movement. This was calculated, planned. At 9:15 p.m. the smell hit me, strong, musky, not bear, not elk, not anything in my research experience. The odor grew stronger as I watched the feeds. The infrared signatures showed body temperatures, 98.6 degrees, human temperature, but the size was impossible. The movement patterns were impossible. Camera 3 caught a clear image, 9 feet tall at least. Massive shoulders, long arms. The night vision showed dark fur, dense fur, not bear fur, not any known species. I zoomed in on the face. The eyes reflected the infrared light, but wrong. Not like animal eyes. Different, intelligent, aware. More cameras triggered. The shapes moved between them, coordinated movements. They were mapping the grid, learning the camera positions. At 9:30 p.m., they started taking down cameras, methodically, systematically. Each camera went dark in sequence, not damaged, not destroyed, just disabled. I watched through my night vision binoculars. They moved with precision, with purpose. Each camera carefully dismounted, placed on the ground, facing away from their movement areas. The smell grew stronger. My hands shook on the keyboard. Sweat formed despite the cold. But I kept recording, kept documenting. Science demanded data. At 9:45 p.m., only 3 cameras remained active. The shapes had mapped the entire grid, learned every blind spot, every gap in coverage. A sound cut through the darkness, deep, resonant, not bear, not elk, not anything in my research records. Then another answered, from a different direction. I activated my audio recorder. The sounds continued, complex patterns, variations in pitch and duration. They were communicating, coordinating. Movement caught my eye. Something large, moving through the trees near my blind. The branches shook under its weight, too high for any known species, too deliberate for any known animal. I raised my night vision binoculars, started scanning. The shape moved with impossible grace for its size, testing the air, checking the wind direction. Then I saw another, larger, moving to my left, a third to my right. They were positioning themselves, using the sounds to coordinate their movements. The smell became overwhelming. My eyes watered, my throat tightened, but I kept recording, kept documenting, even as my hands shook on the equipment. At 10:00 p.m., the last camera went dark. Only my personal recording equipment remained. The shapes moved closer to my blind. Their footsteps shook the ground, their breathing clearly audible. I had to move, had to run, but they had positioned themselves perfectly, every escape route blocked. The smell was overpowering now, the sounds closer, more insistent. At 10:15 p.m. I made my decision, grabbed my essential data drives, left the rest. The evidence I had mattered more than the equipment. I ran, straight ahead, through the narrowest gap in their formation. They moved instantly, fast, impossibly fast. The forest erupted with sound, breaking branches, heavy impacts. Those deep calls turned to powerful roars. The pursuit was coordinated. Every time I tried to change direction, one would appear, force me back on course. They were herding me, controlling my movement through the forest. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I heard them behind me, getting closer, the smell stronger, the sounds louder, the roars more excited. Branches whipped my face, rocks turned under my boots. I lost equipment, didn't matter, had to reach my vehicle, 2 miles away, too far. They matched my pace, stayed just behind me. Their footsteps shook the ground. Their breathing grew louder, their calls more frequent. The access road appeared ahead. I saw my truck, fumbled with the keys. They were right behind me now. I could feel their breath, smell their presence, hear their movements. I reached the truck, got inside, locked the doors, started the engine. Only then did I look back. They stood at the forest edge, 3 of them, enormous, their fur dark and thick, those intelligent eyes fixed on me, studying, calculating, remembering. We stared at each other, 2 minutes, 3. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Then they turned, stepped back into the darkness, their movements synchronized, deliberate, not running, not afraid, just leaving. I drove straight to the research station, reported everything, showed them the recordings, the data, the measurements. The images were blurry, always blurry, but the data remained, the thermal readings remained, the audio recordings remained. Evidence, facts, science. The official report says unidentified large mammals exhibiting advanced problem-solving behavior. That's what academic protocol requires. That's what I had to write. But we know what we recorded, what we measured, what moves through those mountains. I still conduct research, still monitor wildlife, but never alone now, never in that area, and always watching the darkness, listening for those sounds, testing the air,